Oh yeah, thanks Jim for doing that. Can you guys see my
Yep.
slideshow?
Yep.
Okay. I'm only seeing some of you now. Hey Jim, since I got them on the other screen of my slideshow on a separate screen, shouldn't I be able to see all my options on one side?
You should see it in your pop-up.
Yeah, I'm not.
Upper on the bottom, depending on where you're at. If you hover, you should see it.
Hey Jim, I'm not seeing.
You talking about like the grid view and stuff like that you're looking for, Mo? Like on the Zoom?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I can.
If I hover over mine, it pops up.
Now I've lost it completely by sharing it on my other screen. Let me stop this and try again. I was trying to use two screens and it's not working the way I wanted. All right, let's try this again. Let's try this screen. Oh wait. There we go. It's at the top. That's why, Jim. It's at the top.
Yeah.
All right. Let me try it. Let me try it again. So I do 1 to 2 screens. Apologies, folks. I should have been practicing this stuff. We mostly use Google. I always forget how. There we go. Now I can see it all. Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yeah, you have your main.
You have your desktop up.
Oh, well, that's not going to help. I picked the right screen. Oh, there it is. Apologies. You guys get to see how packed my desktop is.
Yeah, you got what mine looks like. Mo.
Yes, I always get lectured about it.
Hey Mo, will you be sending out this PowerPoint when you're done?
Yeah, that's no problem.
Thank you.
There's nothing earth-shattering in it, though.
It's a great looking PowerPoint.
Yeah, although I changed all of it.
Change it all.
Yes, you'll notice I changed it drastically, but thank you for getting it started, Sam. All right, well, I'm kind of ahead of myself here. Let's do some introductions and ground rules. Before we start with introductions, it looks like everybody is participating. Actually, let me pull up that list of participants. Hang on 1 second. All right. Looks like I don't have anyone on the phone, so that helps. Jim, if you see anyone hop on the phone, if you just alert me if I miss it, that'd be greatly appreciated so I can provide them the instructions for unmuting and raising their hand. Since everybody's on the computer, you should see the functions for doing everything I just said. You can raise your hand to be recognized, and then of course you can mute and unmute yourself. You can, can they share their video, Jim? Can they be seen?
Yeah.
Attendees cannot.
What's that?
Attendees cannot share their video.
Oh, is that a Zoom thing? Can we make that change or no?
I can't make it in midstream with the meeting going.
Gotcha. All right. Well, in the future, let's allow them
Early.
Okay, that sounds good. It looks like Mike just joined us too. Mike, if you can hear me, please accept my invitation to be a panelist. Maybe he stepped away from his computer. Okay. Well, anyway, for those of you that have joined via computer, like I was saying, please utilize the chat feature if you want. You can speak to the host and panelists only. You can speak to everyone. You can speak to individual people if you like. Please note, everybody, that this is being recorded. I assume, Jim, this also records the chats. Is that correct? Well, we'll pretend it does until we hear otherwise.
I accepted your panelist
Ah.
thing.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome to the party. And then I still don't see anyone on the phone, so I'll save those instructions for later. But yeah, feel free to use the chat feature. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and then unmute yourself and then speak. And then once you're done speaking, please mute yourself. Same goes for all the panelists. Sam, you too, mute yourself when you're not speaking. That way we reduce the potential for background noise disrupting the meeting. Okay, thank you guys so much. And then I want to get in, oh, sorry, here's the rest of the agenda, actually. We're gonna actually get into introductions and ground rules in a minute. And then we're gonna talk about the House Bill 1242 in depth. We're gonna talk about rulemaking. We're gonna have an opportunity to address comments and questions. And then we're gonna do a wrap up. Please know this is the first of 13 meetings, so we've got a long journey in front of us. So I'll start with staff. I'll start with myself. And apologies in advance, I've got a bit of a cough, so I'll try to mute myself or I cough in your ear, but sometimes I don't catch it fast enough. I'm popping these like candy, help me, but on occasion I will be coughing, so sorry about that. Anyway, my name is Mo Miskell. I am the Deputy Division Director for Division Housing. When 1242 started, I was the director of our Office of Regulatory Oversight at the Division Housing, which has two programs. One is our Building Codes and Standards section, which does a variety of things, but primarily it regulates modular construction for installation in Colorado. And we also have another program called the Mobile Home Park Oversight Program. And just so you know, the Building Codes and Standards section has been around for decades. It's had different names, but it's been around for decades. The other program, the Mobile Home Park Oversight Program, is a newer program. It was created through legislation 2019, excuse me, and it regulates, in essence, disputes between homeowners of mobile homes that are not so mobile and landlords of mobile home parks who own the land sitting underneath the homes. And that program manager is Christina Postolowski. The program manager for the Building Codes and Standards section is Donnie Featherman. They're not here with us today, but their new boss, my replacement, is Sam Albrecht. Sam is the new director of the Office of Regulatory Oversight. He started with us mercifully on October 4th. So at some point in time, I'll be transitioning most of this to him as I get more involved on division-wide initiatives. I'll always be involved in this. I just won't be as heavily involved as I will initially. Sam, would you like to introduce yourself and provide some background to everybody?
Absolutely. Well, welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here. My 5th week on the job, so be gentle with me, but we're slowly getting up to speed. Real quick, I spent 7 years in the Air Force. I'm an honest to God rocket scientist, and then went to work for nonprofits, and did that for 25 years. And then I went to work for local government. Most recently, I was the county manager over in Elbert County, and ran because of some staff changes, ran the planning shop for a while and the building department for a while, and emergency management and health and human services and a lot of other departments. They had a pretty big turnover when I came on board. So that's my background, and I am looking forward to working with you all in the future.
Sorry, I muted myself and I forgot to unmute. Don't forget to do that when you're speaking. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. That's all the staff that we've got participating. I'm going to turn it over to the TAC members. And Jeff is not with us. So folks know Jeff Dickinson is the architect on the TAC. Justin Bucky is our structural engineer on the TAC, but he's not on either. Janine Snyder is a building plans examiner. She may be the new building official. I haven't checked in there in a while for Park County, my county. She's unfortunately not with us either. So Tim, we're gonna start with you. Tim Pate with the City and County of Broomfield. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Tim Pate. I'm City and County of Broomfield Chief Building Official. My background, for some who haven't, I've had the pleasure of working with on the TAC. I've been helping Mo on the TAC for many years. I don't know how many, but quite a few cycles. It's been a lot of fun kind of trying to help out from a building code knowledge standpoint. But I've been with the City and County of Broomfield for 22 and a half years, been the building official for about 12. Worked for City of Louisville before that for 8 years. And then I was on the other side of the fence and had a contracting company from the time I started or got my degree from CU. So I had a degree with psychology. And then like many of us, we became carpenters. So the psychology, we joke, the psychology of bending nails. So pleasure to meet everybody and see everybody again. Thanks.
That's awesome. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, Tim, it's been 5+ years that a lot of us on the TAC and myself been working together since I started on August 7th of 2017. Just so you guys know too, Tim was also appointed to be a board member of the newly created Energy Code Board. So that's another bill we're going to be talking about later. We've got some time with that one, so I don't want to distract from what we need to do with implementing 1242 and doing some other important things we've been talking about for several years. But just keep that in the back of your mind too. There's a Energy Code bill, House Bill 22-1362, that we're going to be implementing as well. So Tim's a voting member of the board. It's 21 members. So if you think the TAC is big, the board is much bigger. And I will be participating, but only voting when the executive director, Rick Garcia for DOLA, is unable to participate. So Tim and I'll be working closely on that initiative as well. Thank you, Tim. So he's going to do double duty for as long as he can. If at some point in time, the Energy Code Board takes up too much of his time, there's a potential we may have to replace Tim on the TAC. All right, Mark Lindsay, you're up, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Lindsay. I work for ICC NTA. I am a plan reviewer, basically of all the disciplines. Been with the TAC, I don't know what, 7 years now, or 7 or 8 years. I've been with NTA for 17 years. Before that, I worked for the state of Arizona for 12 years. That's how I met some of you guys when I was out there. Other than that, anytime you have any code questions or something comes up, Mo can give you my contact information. You can contact me anytime. Now I am in Oregon, so my time difference is I have a little bit of time difference, but other than that, give me a holler.
Thank you, Mark. Being in Oregon helps with watching sports, but does not help with receiving phone calls.
That's true.
Sumit, as a new member on the TAC, he's unable to join us today, looks like. For those of you who've been on the TAC for a while, he replaced Glenn Goodwin, remember, from Custom Information Services. So Sumit is from the same organization. So they're basically, he's going to be the voice of reason representing factory built non-residential structures. So all the commercial industrial stuff.
I'm gonna miss Glenn.
I know. He's quiet but deadly.
Yeah, I liked him.
When he spoke, we all listened.
He did.
James McLean, sir.
Hello, everyone. My name is James McLean. I'm the Building Operations Manager for Arapahoe County. My background, been an electrician for 25 years, pretty much the only career I've ever had. I worked for, before I came to Arapahoe County, I worked for the Department of Regulatory Agencies for 9 years. So
Thank you,
hopefully
James.
I can help contribute to everything we're doing.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So James is one of our newer members. Also, he replaced Jim Cook as our electrical person on the our electrical engineering and contracting on the TAC. John McGee, you're up, sir.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the plumbing inspector supervisor for the city of Colorado. Now I'm one of two. We recently promoted one of our inspectors, James Fernandez. So if something happens and I'm not available, I might push him off on you guys if you need some questions. Been with Dora since 2008 as the plumbing inspector. And then for the last few years, I've been the supervisor. Before that, I was a plumbing contractor for, I even hate to say how long, but a few years. And so, yeah, and I'm first year on this to help you guys out, or hopefully I'll be some help and service to you for this project.
Thank you, John. You're going to be invaluable, my friend. So for those who've been on TAC for a while, John replaced Bob Klein as a representative from plumbing. John Meyer, you're up next, sir.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, as Mo said, I'm John Meyer from Heritage Homes here in Nebraska, minority owner here and vice president with a heavy focus on Colorado sales and Colorado building.
Great, John. Thank you so much. Mike Morrow, you're up, sir.
Mike Morrow, I'm with a manufacturer, Bonneville, located in Nebraska. As well, I've been in modular and manufactured housing for over 25 years. 10 of those at a factory located in Colorado, and the last over 10 now at this factory that does a lot of business in Colorado. So,
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Maybe one day we'll have you guys move back. Sean Roos, you're up, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Sean Roos. I'm general manager with Clayton Homes of Grand Junction. Been in the manufactured modular housing industry for 38 years. Been on the TAC for a long time. I mean, I think at least 10 or 12 years, but I'm not sure. Glad to be again on the TAC and discussing all this information, and hope to be of help.
Thank you, Sean. So Sean provides obviously an excellent perspective from the seller vantage point. And as he shared, he's been around for a while. So a lot of institutional knowledge, more than most of us have. Nate Peterson, last but not least.
Last but not least.
Actually, that's for the current TAC. We got the new members too. Apologies.
Yes. Sean, I just went and looked, and the oldest email I have for a TAC meeting is 2012. And so I think Sean's definitely been on it, I think, a little bit longer than I have. So for the new members, I will say this is actually kind of fun. You're going to meet some people that you'll need to use as surprising resources, in the years to come. I kind of come to the TAC from a couple different perspectives. Like Sean, I own a dealership selling modular homes in Colorado. Been in the modular space for about 18, 19 years now in Colorado. I'm also an installer. So I know, Mo, I don't know what you have me down for these days as far as which box I check, but I'm one of the few, I think, installers on the TAC right now for the modular stuff. Background wise, I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer. I also do a lot of work in affordable housing. I'm on the board of Colorado Housing and Finance Authority here in Colorado, and seemingly stick my nose in a lot of legislation stuff that's been going on lately. So,
yeah, Nate's been awesome. He's operating on all fronts related to housing these days, which is fantastic. Yeah. So, for those of you who are not familiar, CHAFA, they're an important partner in addressing the affordable housing crisis in the state as well. So, it's great to have Nate there, really talking about how modular and now tiny homes could potentially help be an option in addressing the affordable housing solution for Colorado. So an important advocate for us.
Yeah.
So those are the members that were placed for positions that have been in statute for some time. We have 3, so that's 12 members, right? Not all present, but we also added 3 more positions, and 2 of those positions have been filled. So I'd like to have those 2 folks introduce themselves. I will start with Margarita.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you all for having me here. I'm really excited to be a new member of this TAC. So my company is called Mini Dwell. We are manufacturing tiny homes. That's is going to be our niche. And yeah, my background is in architecture. I've been in residential design for 5 years at least. And now I'm planning to move only into these tiny homes manufacturing.
Thank you, Margarita. And then we have Tracy.
Hi, everybody. My name's Tracy Manchego Baker. I am with Tiny Building Experts out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I'm a complete rookie to the team. I'm excited, though, to get to work with all of you guys and learn from all of you guys and hopefully contribute from the tiny house industry perspective. My background was actually after an 11-year career with MCI, I went into software and really got to dive into the Six Sigma world from a process improvement perspective with optimization and simulation software and implementation. So that was a great career. It was a lot of fun. And then, you know, good old Larry Ellison over at Oracle. I believe my company was his 31st acquisition in 31 months. And once you become acquired, you know, things just kind of change. And in software, it seems like that was kind of the flavor of the month. I went through several acquisitions, actually, through several companies, and decided that that was a little exhausting, and was invited into the tiny house industry back in 2016 with a company by the name of Tumbleweed. And my husband had already been building tiny houses for them for a couple of years. His name is Austin Baker. He's also been in the tiny house industry since 2014. But we are just a small little mom and pop shop. So hopefully we're here to represent the small tiny house builders. We obviously don't have a footprint like Clayton. A lot of respect for Clayton Homes. We just don't have that footprint. So we're a lot of mom and pop shop builders that I'm hoping to represent, as well as a tiny house owner. Colorado landowner, native, and small business owner. So I'm hoping to have different hats as I join this team.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
So good to have everybody here for our kickoff meeting. Been threatening to have this meeting for some time. Apologies for not starting sooner. There's just been a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine. For those of you not that familiar with division housing, there were double-digit bills that were passed as past legislation, this just being one of them. And of course, I spoke about the energy code bill. We also had a massive bill impacting our mobile home park oversight program. We've also been working closely with OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, on a bill that they ran to incentivize innovative housing construction in the state, which includes modular, of course. And so we've been important partner in that. But the vast majority of the bills are for funding, you know, addressing anything from construction across the board. Because as you may not know this, division of housing is a big gap financer for affordable housing projects in the state. So when people projects need additional funding to get over that finish line, we're a big partner in helping them with that. So a lot of money has come our way to help with that, to address homelessness in the state. So as you can imagine, in my new role, I've been spread pretty thin on helping in a variety of areas. I have not lost track of this, of course, but just had to delay it a bit. Also, we've had to begin working on the technology side of ensuring that we can effectively implement 1242 and incorporate tiny homes into our current model for oversight in the state. And we've already started that process, and that's a tricky process. So we've been spending a lot of time on that as well. But I'm glad to have this meeting start. Today's going to be more of a foundation setting meeting, if you will. And we're going to kind of use this meeting to provide some background for those of you who may not have read the bill in its entirety, kind of to highlight the important pieces of it. And then, of course, we'll go into we'll hear from the tiny home industry on thoughts about how to proceed. And then we will, of course, pull out some action items from that and revisit at the next meeting after we decide what we want to start with. So the last item here on this page of the slideshow is regarding conduct and decision making. For those of you who are new to TAC or those who've been on the TAC for some time, this is a reminder that this body is not a decision-making body, right? So anything that comes out of this meeting, in essence, has the force of nothing other than it's a recommendation, right? Doesn't mean it's not important work. It's very important work, but whatever comes out of it doesn't mean it's going to actually happen. So I want people to understand that. So people should be free to share their opinions. They should be free of being bullied, personally or professionally, because of their opinions. There are going to be varied opinions. Not everybody's going to see eye to eye. Keep it professional. Don't make it personal. And most certainly don't bully somebody through your business connections or political connections for that matter, right? If you disagree with someone, you disagree with someone. That's the way it is. You either change your mind with information or you just accept that they are settled on their opinion. It's just the way it is. There are going to be 15 members. Ideally, we'll reach consensus on items. Most likely, we won't reach consensus on every item. So simple majority rules, okay? I'll be taking votes. I'm not voting. I am just helping lead the discussion and making sure you have all the information you need to make informed decisions. And ultimately, the decisions that you make are submitted in the form of proposed rules, which I will file for statutory requirements for formal public input in written and verbal, in the form of written and verbal testimony before the State Housing Board, which is the decision maker. So the State Housing Board will consider what you proposed. It will consider input from the public in reaction to what you proposed. So not everything prior, but everything as a result of the proposed rules. And then it will make a decision. And there are 8 members on the State Housing Board. They represent the 8 congressional districts in Colorado. It used to be 7. We've grown as a state, so we now have an 8th one. So we have an 8th member on that board. So ultimately, it will be the decision maker, and whatever it decides will then be adopted as permanent rules and will be noticed for an attorney general review to make sure it's consistent with law and not in contradiction of law. And once they provide their legal sufficiency review and everything's okay, then it'll be noticed as final rules and then will be published as such, okay? I just want people to understand the role of TAC. It's really to work through what is out there and to make as best as possible a recommendation that works for the state of Colorado, both being practical, being safe for consumers, but also being not too cumbersome for business to follow. I hope that makes sense for everybody. Okay, so once again, because I've heard examples of this happening in the past, and I'm not going to tolerate it. I don't want to hear about anybody bullying anybody. So if you don't like the opinion of somebody, don't call your boss and have them call their boss. Whatever you guys do professionally or personally is separate from this. You're bringing in your professional perspective and your personal to help guide us, where you're not going to use what is discussed here to push people around professionally and personally. I hope that makes sense. Okay. If you have any questions or concerns about that, don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right. So sorry for the sobering commentary, but it's an important commentary to have, especially as we grow. All right. As we talked about, 1242. This is the big thing we've got to implement this year through the Technical Advisory Committee. And this has been a labor of love. of Eric Freed. Eric Freed is the building official for Larimer County. I did not ask him to introduce himself earlier, even though he's a panelist, because he's not on the TAC. But I'm going to have him introduce himself now. Eric.
Yeah, as Mo said, I'm the Larimer County building official. Been doing that about 10 years. Before that, I was a building inspector and a code compliance officer. And I guess I'm here because it's our fault in a way that there is this bill that we now all have to deal with. We had a lot of people coming to us in Larimer County, either our building or our planning side, saying, hey, I want to live in a tiny house, I want to bring a tiny house to my site. How can I do that legally year round? And we had to tell them, well, there's really no way you can legally live in a tiny house year round. Even if we changed our land use code to allow for more than 180 days occupancy of an RV, tiny house, if it's built to any standard right now, it's built to an RV or a recreational park vehicle standard, and those are intended for temporary seasonal vacation use. They're not intended for year-round occupancy. And it's true, you can build a tiny house on a foundation and get it inspected at each stage of construction, but we've never had anyone actually do that. We have a permit right now to do that, so that's easy enough. That gets handled through the usual way. But if it's a prefabricated tiny house, it doesn't quite fit any of the existing boxes. So, and our commissioners were getting the same question a lot. So at some point, one of our commissioners came to me and said, Eric, what would have to change in state law to allow for year-round residency of tiny houses? And I said, well, I have some ideas, which turned out to be all wrong, but I have some ideas. I could write you a memo. They said, that's great. We're going to propose a bill to CCI, Colorado Counties Inc. Can you write it up? Sure. When do you need it? Tomorrow at 2. So I wrote a memo just as a starting point and look at different places in state law. And then our state rep, Kathy Kipp from Fort Collins, decided she would run the bill. CCI was in favor of it, but it wasn't on their top 10 or top 8 they could really push. So then Kathy started meeting with bill writers and Division of Housing as well as Division of Regulatory Agencies to ask, because this runs into your territory under state law. And we started having a bunch of meetings and the bill evolved, and Mo and his team were brought in. And so it was really a combined effort between Kathy and the legislative writers and myself and Mo. So any parts of the bill that you really like, those were mine. And any parts of the bills that you don't like, those were the parts Mo could. No, we're going to find things in the bill that are not perfect, but that's the way sausages and bills are made, or but the basic thrust was we need something that's appropriate to tiny houses, because at least in my opinion, a tiny house is not a manufactured home. It's different. It's not a modular home. I mean, it could be. It's not an RV. It's its own thing. And we're about 8 to 10 years behind the industry in trying to come up with regulations for this. So the bill says, hey, Division of Housing, you're going to adopt rules to implement this bill by next July 1st. You're going to adopt some kind of standard for tiny houses because we don't have one. And by the way, ASTM did just recently decide to set up a tiny house standards development subcommittee under the existing buildings committee. So that's working on a parallel track. And it made some other changes to define tiny houses. And also that's kind of where the bill came from. And then it did, at least in the House, became kind of a partisan thing for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, one party backed it, the other one didn't. But when it got to the state Senate, it was bipartisan. It had almost overwhelming support in the state Senate. So it passed. It required the Technical Advisory Committee to add members. It required us to do so. I'm not on the committee, to do some work. And that's kind of the genesis of how we got here today.
Sorry, thank you, Eric. I was struggling to unmute myself here. That was really helpful background. As we go through the especially definition section, I might have you, Eric, provide some context. You just reminded me of something, though, a couple of things actually. So for people not familiar with rulemaking, it's very much different from running a bill, right? It's not the legislative process. This is a process with the executive branch of government, and rules are intended to clarify statute, right? Not create statute, not change statute. So if there are opportunities to clarify something in the bill legally, we will do so. If there's something that people identify in the bill, it's a problem, which is of course not law, or something's missing from the law that needs to be addressed, then that will have to be done through the legislative process. This is not the forum for that. I can collect that information, of course, and disseminate to interested parties. But any opportunity for Dole itself to run a bill next year, for example, that ship has sailed. So if anybody identifies something important that needs to be addressed, they're going to have to run a bill and find sponsors for that bill to get it through. Of course, if there's something that's uber important that can't be done this year, I can file it away and we can try as a department to run a bill next year, but we have to prioritize it with all the other needs of the department. And we're only allowed so many bills to come out of a department. So just something to keep in mind. But if there are opportunities to clarify and rule, we will do so. That's what this whole process is about. If there are some things that are be more process oriented that comes out of this, it doesn't have to be in the form of rules. Those are things we can change instantly, and we can do that separately. But for the rulemaking, I already talked about that process, and that's where we're going to be spending the vast majority of our time, I suspect. Since we have a small group of attendees, normally I don't open it up to attendees because sometimes we have a large group. Actually, so since there's only looks like 8 different people from what I can tell, I'm going to open it up to the attendees and ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Tani. Peyton.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tani.
My name is Tani Payton. I'm the executive director for the Rocky Mountain Home Association. We represent the manufactured and modular home industry in the state.
Thank you, Tani. And once again, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself just to limit the background noise. And that wasn't a response to you, Tani. Just I noticed a few people have joined us since we started. Brad Wiseman, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm the CEO and chairman of the board for the Tiny Home Industry Association. We've been following this for a number of months and been working with Tracy Manchego-Baker and a group of other builders in Colorado to begin preparation for this sort of advisory committee action.
Thank you, Brad. It's good to have you on board. Appreciate you taking the
By
time.
the way, I'm not sure how to mute myself now because I don't have that control.
No worries, I can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Byron Fears. Byron, can you hear us? You need to unmute to introduce yourself if you like.
Okay. Am I on now?
Yes, you are, sir.
Okay, I'm Byron Fears, owner of Simplicity Tiny Homes located in Lyons. I'm one of the older builders in the United States. Might have been 10 other builders of tiny homes when I started, and one of the 3 oldest builders in Colorado. I'm also on the executive board of Tiny Home Industry Association. I've been working with different counties and municipalities for over 8 years trying to get tiny homes legalized here in Colorado. I'm instrumental in getting the second legal spot in the whole country for tiny homes here in Lyons. I've been working with Mo and Eric since the beginning of this bill, trying to help change some things and construct it in a way that will be conducive to tiny home builders and to the owners of tiny homes here in Colorado. And I look forward to being an active part of this. Unfortunately, I'm not on the TAC team, but I look forward to being an active part of providing information and guidance in the construction of this bill.
Thank you, Byron. Appreciate that. Art, I'm guessing that's you, Colorado Tiny Home Festival. And actually, I can unmute you, so I'll do that right now, or I'll allow you to unmute yourself. Then you'll have the opportunity to mute yourself. You see that option? Looks like you unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, yes, this is Art Mo. Thank you very much. My name is Art Lawball. I am the organizer of the Colorado Tiny House Festival, builder with Einstein Tiny Homes, and the president of the Colorado Tiny House Association.
Thank you, sir. Dan Fitzpatrick.
Yes, I'm Dan Fitzpatrick. I'm president of the Tiny Home Industry Association and also the director of government affairs for the American tiny home industry. Been very involved in tiny homes and legalizing tiny homes around the country for the past 7 years. My background is 25 years in government as a county administrator, city manager, and 25 years as a developer. So I've sat on both sides of the desk on these various issues and looking forward to working with the committee as it promulgates the rules and regulations for tiny homes.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Thank you for joining us. Looks like Mike Schmidt, you're on twice, so I'm gonna just pick one. Hopefully that works. So pick the wrong one. Let's try this other one.
There you are. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Hi, appreciate the opportunity. This is Mike Schmidt. I'm from Ensemble Ventures here in Colorado Springs, 20-year-old business development and go-to-market consulting company. I've been active in the tiny home industry since 2015 when I was asked to become the first business development director for the Tiny Home Industry Association. I held the first conference in 2016 here in Colorado for looking at the standards for the tiny home industry. Obviously brought in a number of some of the key people that are currently at the association today. And obviously we're all working towards getting tiny houses to become a alternative and low cost and affordable and sustainable solution for housing in Colorado as well as across the nation. As many of you know, I've been kind of brought back into the fray, into the industry. I left in 2018, but came back here recently in the last couple of years to work on the ASTM International Tiny House Standard. We've obviously been pursuing the development of this ASTM model for many, many months, probably close to a year and a half. Happy to say that we now finally have an ASTM subcommittee that's going to be assigned under the EO6 Performance of Buildings Committee for ASTM. We're getting ready to launch and start our process, which will include not only stakeholders in the America, but internationally as well. I think at last count, we had something like 180. Was actively involved in the testimonies for the new bill and did testify on some of the improvements and changes and amendments that we'd like to see on the bill over time. So happy to participate on the TAC and provide input and feedback from not only the consumer side, but also from private industry, private investors who are obviously interested in the development and evolution of tiny home communities, where we can see the collection of tiny houses, not just single tiny houses, but the development of tiny home communities as well. So I'll leave it there. Happy to participate. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Okay, and Mike, to answer your question from earlier, yes, I will provide I'll have each TAC member write a brief, and I stress brief, paragraph or two about themselves, and I'll get that out to everybody.
Thanks a lot, Mo. Appreciate it.
No problem. Okay. Robin Butler.
Hello, everyone. Robin Butler here, and I am the president and CEO of NOAA Certified, which is a third-party inspection company that we started back in 2015, specifically to provide oversight on the tiny houses on wheels, which at that time really didn't have anything except for RVIA as RVs. And so we have been successfully inspecting and certifying tiny houses since 2016. We can go back, we do everything remotely, so we can go back and pull those files out from 2016. The good thing, I guess, from our standpoint is we've added to the RV standards, what we call a NOAA Plus standard, and some of the jurisdictions like San Luis Obispo in California and Blaine County, Idaho, has adopted not only the NOAA Plus standard as more suitable for full-time habitation, but also the inspection process that we use through inspecting it like a site-built home. So I'm looking forward to working with and helping out wherever I can, guys.
Great, Robin. Thank you so much. Excuse me. I think I've got a couple more people. At SK, you're just identified as SK.
Hey there. My name's Susan Krasno. I'm in Dallas, Texas, and I'm here because Colorado and California are way ahead of Texas, and I guess I would say I'm more on the consumer side. I've lived tiny myself. I've been involved in the tiny house world for about 8 years. Working toward legalization here in Texas. I'm very familiar with, I've participated in NOAA events, ASTM. I, follow what's happening closely. And so I also admin a group of about 3,000 people in Texas who are either buying tiny or living tiny. And so I was just interested to hear what you all were going to cover today.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we have one more person, Austin Baker. Tracy, this must be your husband.
All right. Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to, I just put this app on my phone, so bear with me. My name's Austin Baker. In the tiny house industry, probably been doing this, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, about 450 builds or so. Pretty excited to hear what's coming along.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. I think I've got everybody covered. If I've missed anybody, please raise your hand. Thank you guys all for taking the time to join. Now, Eric did an excellent job of setting the table, if you will, for the background for the tiny home bill. Just to recap a few things, I like to describe this bill as the missing middle, right? So we already have, we're not going to get into HUD manufactured homes. But with what we can regulate as a state body and what is causing confusion and why this bill was necessary is we've got a spectrum here, right? So on one end, we've got modular construction that we already regulate through our building codes and standards section, which we are on the 2018 IRC, and we've already adopted several years ago Appendix Q for tiny houses, which is Appendix AQ now for those who are on the 2021 IRC. So we've already been allowing for that for several years. The catch being, those structures have to be on a permanent foundation. Now, what we've learned through the last several years is everybody has a different definition for what's a permanent foundation. This group has struggled with creating a definition for it, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail later. But so we already have that on one end of the spectrum, and that is a dwelling, right? On the other end of the spectrum, where the tiny home community has been living in, for the most part, at least in the regulated side of it, is basically as park models, right? Recreational park trailers. And that, as mentioned by Robin and others, is regulated differently. And actually Eric shared this as well. They're built and constructed, recognized as such. Some may be, have better, have increased their construction method or codes that they apply, but ultimately they're certified as RVs, recreational vehicle trailers, right? Which is limited in use. They're designed and constructed for seasonal short-term use. In essence, they're not dwellings, right? So that's the two ends of the spectrums. This bill is creating a new group that is going to be defined in Colorado to be the following, right? So as of the effective date of this bill, which was August 10th, if memory serves me right, this is what a tiny home now means in Colorado. Now, we haven't started certifying these yet because, as mentioned by Eric, that process doesn't start until July 1st of 2023. But in essence, this is what we're working towards. So an important piece here is similar to what you see on the HUD code manufactured home and a park model, is this will be on a vehicle chassis, right? But the big difference between it and a park model is this one is designed for long-term residency, right? So that's the missing middle piece. Unlike, though, a current IRC Appendix Q home, sorry, it's not in this definition. Unlike that, this product that we're striving for is going to be able to be on a permanent or temporary foundation. So similar to a HUD code manufactured home as well. So there's going to be more flexibility here. So this is going to be the challenge, right? And probably potentially more mobile than a HUD code manufactured home. As we all know, a HUD code manufactured home may be built on a chassis, but is really designed to be transported from where it was manufactured to its installation site, with all intents and purposes to remain there. But they are situated in mobile home parks, and on occasion, those occupants need to move to another park or somewhere else. And so they're designed to do that, even though it becomes more challenging if something has been installed for many decades that's a manufactured HUD code home and potentially has a bunch of other things built on it. But this product that we're talking about, in some instances, because of consumer needs, may be highly mobile. So we got to consider that. Something that's a dwelling, but it's very mobile when you compare it to a HUD code manufactured home. Okay, so that's the challenge that we're faced with. And it's good to hear that there's other entities out there and organizations working on developing standards for tiny homes. We have a more aggressive time frame, as everybody's heard. We got to come up with something for Colorado by July 1st, 2023. Now, that being said, since it's going to be housed in rulemaking, it's not going to be as fixed, if you will, as it would if it was the statute, right? So there's some flexibility there. But we still have to go through the rulemaking hearing process. So just keep that in mind. So if it's something in rule, we can change it. And you will learn as we go through this process how we do that for the modular industry. Okay, which is why there's an advantage here of incorporating tiny homes, the regulation in tiny homes, into the structure we already have for modular, right? This has been around for decades. You're not going to get lost in the shuffle, but you're going to learn a lot about what has been happening. And maybe having you as a breath of fresh air will help bring some new ideas on how the whole process can be improved. We've already talked about new members on the TAC. We've introduced 2 of them. There's a third one that's missing. Excuse me. That I've been working to appoint. Another reason we had a bit of a delay. Well, actually, a good part of the delay was trying to pick the 2 members from the tiny home industry, but we're still short one person from energy conservation. I reached out to several groups involved in energy conservation, and we haven't yet received interested parties for that position. So if you're aware of anybody with that background who might be interested, by all means, have them contact me. It'd be great to get their voice on the TAC as soon as possible. Of course, energy conservation will be moot in the near future once the Energy Code Board establishes its model codes, and the law requires us to adopt the at a minimum the 2021 IECC by I believe July 1st, 2025, if memory serves me right. No, I think January 1st of 2025. If I'm incorrect about that, I'll let you guys know. But we've got a few years, but at some point in time, this is all going to become moot. And for those of you who don't know, we're currently in 2015 IECC. The IECC is one of the more controversial codes we discuss in this group. But as I mentioned, that particular bill, if you have not read it, please read it, because it will impact everybody, including us on the modular side, and of course, tiny homes as well. And I'd be more than happy to share that link with you if you don't have it. And Nate, I just got your IM. Thank you. Yes, if you could reach out to folks that you know that you think might be interested, please do. All right, so we've got several. The bill is quite extensive. In addition to establishing the regulation of tiny homes in Colorado and defining it, etc., it also identifies some other areas to be addressed. The other one is foundation systems. So in talking with Eric Reed from Larimer County, who's on this call, I brought to his attention, and I think he was surprised by it, that we are limited to just a structure, right? And of course, it's installation. As far as code compliance is concerned, but not every jurisdiction has the building department to oversee the site work. And of course, the most important piece being the foundation itself. So we do actually have instances where a home is constructed and certified to the acceptable codes that we've adopted. It's installed, right? Same process, inspected and certified. But the very foundation it's sitting on, nobody's inspected and certified. And so Eric was kind enough to add this into the bill to ensure that for those jurisdictions that do not have a building department, we at the Division of Housing will also be certifying those foundation systems. Now, that's not for all type of construction, just to make sure we're clear, right? It's for the type of construction we regulate. So factory built structures, both residential and non-residential, which will of course include tiny homes, pre-1976 mobile homes, if they're being installed, moved around and installed, if they're still in existence, HUD code manufactured homes, if they're being installed newly or being moved around. And of course, what we also regulate that people may not know is we regulate even site-built construction limited to hotels, motels, and multifamily structures in jurisdictions that don't have a building department. So in that area, we're already covered. But for the rest of the most of what we do, we're not covered with regard to foundation systems. So this is a big deal, and we're going to have to figure out how to effectively implement this as well. This is probably the second biggest piece besides tiny home implementation itself. And of course, the tiny home piece is massive. It includes construction as well as installation. And then the next one is, especially for those of you who are new to what we do, we not only regulate the construction that's done off-site, whether it be someone's backyard, whether it be a high school, whether it be a factory, right? That clearly we regulate. But the other piece that we regulate that's not always clear to everybody is, and we're seeing more and more of this happen as builders realize that they can gain efficiencies or at least mitigate damage during transportation, that some things are just best served to be completed on site. So you're not seeing as much whole structures that are completed in a factory setting coming out and being installed, but you're seeing the vast majority being done but some critical elements being completed on site. So we have a process for accounting that, the law, and this was clarified in this bill to account for it, because the way it was written was confusing to some folks, because it basically said this oversight included when components were shipped with the structure to be completed on site. Well, then the questions are, does it have to be on the same truck bed? Does it have to be in the same convoy? Can it be shipped separately? What if it's provided on site by a third party that produces that, integral piece cheaper, right? So how does that all fit in together? So we basically made it cleaner in statute just to reflect that any of that work that needs to be completed on site that's reflected in the plans to complete the structure as a code-compliant structure, that's part of our process as well. And currently that process is called alternative construction. You'll hear the term AC thrown around. That's what it's talking about. I don't like that term. I haven't since I started. I don't think it adequately describes what it's intended to cover. So I think what I'm going to put on the table, I know what I'm going to put on the table for you guys to consider is coming up with a different term for that. I think it's time to change that alternative construction language to make more sense and use this opportunity to also make more sense of that process. And I know Mike Morrow especially is very interested in this topic. For those of you new to this, what we struggle with historically when things are being completed on site is who's responsible, right? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the seller who sometimes is involved as a developer? Is it a different developer, right? Who we don't have any jurisdiction over? Is it the installer, right? Who's clearly defined, it's defined in statute what they're accountable for, but sometimes are contracted by either the manufacturer or the seller to do more than what they're statutorily obligated to do. So it gets very murky. And at the end of the day, we got to make sure we're certifying a code compliant structure. So we got to identify who's responsible if something's missing, right? And get them to complete that piece. It looks like somebody raised their hand. Byron. You had your hand up, sir.
Hi there. I have a question that hasn't been addressed that I've heard of in this entire bill. I've had many different consumers and potential customers that have asked me about container homes in Colorado. Is this going to be addressed as because they're being built as homes and they're not being regulated as far as I understand?
We're going to get to that, sir. You're getting ahead of the presentation.
Oh, my apologies. Okay. I heard you talking about different things, so I wanted to bring that in. Pardon me.
Good. All good. That's part of the definition of a tiny home, which we're going to get to here shortly.
Okay.
But thank you for raising that. That's a great question that I had flagged for Eric to provide some background on. But I appreciate you raising your hand. And to Byron's point, please know this is interactive. Some of the things may be addressed later in the presentation and the discussion. I'll let you know, but some things may not. So, and I know sometimes it's hard to keep track of your thoughts and questions unless you're writing them down. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to be heard sooner rather than later. Thank you, Byron. You can lower your hand now, Byron, if you don't mind, so I don't get confused with new commentary. I don't see any other hands up, but great question, Byron. We'll get to that here shortly. So the alternative construction process is another really big piece that we've got to get sorted out, especially as we add tiny homes with the potential for them to be completed on site. I'm guessing since they're smaller, that's not going to be as big of an issue as factory built residential and non-residential structures that we have been regulating for decades now in Colorado. And then the new one, we had this big discussion a couple years ago, or goodness, that was last year. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess, or hasn't flown enough, I guess. When we implemented House Bill 21-1019, we really spent a lot of time trying to figure out and haven't quite solved it, although we're getting closer. Nate was kind enough to put me in touch with somebody who might be the answer to our problems here. And Nate, I still have to circle back with him. But anyway, we have the same opportunity here to address what we did previously. So for those of you who are new, and of course, actually tiny homes has been in the news about this very issue, right? where we unfortunately have situations where either manufacturers or sellers, or sometimes they operate as both, right? So a seller is selling directly to the consumer, right? That entity has to be a registered seller. They will have to do the same for tiny homes. The manufacturer is usually selling to the seller, who's then in turn selling to the consumer. But sometimes the manufacturer wants to be the seller and they're selling directly to consumer, so they're registered as both the manufacturer and the seller. So anyway, we've had instances where significant down payments have been collected for the consumer and a product is not delivered. And as I mentioned, this has been prevalent in the news lately for tiny homes being built here in Colorado, right? So we have guardrails in place in statute and rules to help address that. It's not the magic answer to everything, but it's very helpful, right? In that ensuring that any down payment collected, unless it's being used for a specific purpose and is being used within the first 30 days, is protected, whether it's being escrowed or whether there's a bond or certificate deposit or letter of credit in an amount enough to cover all the down payments being held in any given year. Okay, so that's the model we currently have. The piece that we've been working on is the escrow piece, because it is challenging to have a fluctuating amount of down payments collected to match with the letter of credit, certificate deposit, or bond that you have in place, right? So ideally, an escrow is what would be utilized for anything more than $50,000, and the bond would just cover that first $50,000. So that's the piece that we're still working on, and Nate's connected to me to contact, who I think I'm very hopeful is going to solve the escrow part. But we now have to do the same thing for manufacturers. So we have that in place for sellers, right? We also have a bond requirement for installers and liability insurance for installers, but we don't have anything for the manufacturers. So the statute has not been amended for us to implement through rules escrow requirements and bonding, letter of credit, certificate deposit requirements for manufacturers. That's another big piece we got to talk through as well. And then last but not least is just cleanup, things that we've identified since our last round of rulemaking that's confusing at best, maybe just completely unnecessary and causing a hurdle that's preventing a business to flow as it should be, or just some things that we missed there might be room for clarity that we need to address in rules. So it's going to be busy several months between now and the end of March, with the primary goal is to get standards in place in the form of proposed rules by the end of March for tiny home construction and installation. That is the primary goal, because we have a statutory deadline to meet. Everything else, if we can't get it done by March 30th, that's fine. We'll just continue. We'll just schedule more TAC meetings until we get everything we want buttoned up, and we can just have a different rulemaking hearing for the State Housing Board to get that other stuff accomplished, okay? So, but if we can get this stuff done early, and we can do some of this other stuff in parallel, but I just don't want it to distract from getting the tiny home piece done, because we do have a statutory obligation we're trying to meet, okay? So I hope that's clear to everybody. That is the primary focus of this round of TAC meetings. All right, so we did talk about this particular definition, and this is where Byron was jumping to. I'm sorry, my lights just went out. Their motion detectors. Hang on a second. All right, so we talked about what a tiny home is. Oh, Nate, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question on what you just talked about. Like, do you foresee, breaking up into committees and things like that to try to make progress, like you said, in parallel?
Absolutely.
Maybe you said that I missed it.
You're also jumping ahead, sir.
All
yes.
right, fine.
All good, all good. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the strategy later. Right now, we're still setting the foundation, but yeah, keep thinking about that and think about what pieces to break out, etc. So yes, that's definitely an option. Thank you, Nate. Yeah, keep those good ideas coming along, folks. All right, so tiny home, what it does not include, and Byron touched upon a piece of this, And of course, we've already talked about the park model piece, right? It is not a park model, right? Which our statute refers to as a recreational park trailer. And it's most certainly not a recreational vehicle as well. And we've had this discussion come up when the bill was being drafted, and Eric can attest to this, where there are folks that are big proponents of park models, which is awesome. And this option will still exist. This does not remove from that option, as long as people understand that it is a different product that we're talking about implementing here as a tiny home in Colorado. So they shouldn't be calling themselves tiny homes anymore. They're gonna have to come up with, just call themselves park models, right? Because that will create confusion, but this bill will hopefully address that confusion. That option will always exist, but it is for temporary seasonal use only, recreational use only, right? This, as we talked about, is going to be a dwelling. And it's not a semi-trailer. The one that we've been getting questions about, Eric, and you might want to answer this, because I have an answer to this, but I wanted to hear from you since you actually added this language into the bill, is what does it mean when we say tiny home does not include an intermodal shipping container? Does it prevent, for example, someone taking, like we already do with modular construction, taking, or even sidewalk construction for that matter, taking a shipping container and converting it into a tiny home? Is this saying we can't do that, or just saying you just can't live in a shipping container? What are we saying here?
That was, the latter was my intention, is that because we have people who bring a shipping container on site and then live in it, well, they don't have proper ventilation, sanitation, electrical, or anything. That's not a tiny home. But if you want to start with the shipping container as the base and then convert it to meet all the requirements of a dwelling, and you do that off-site and bring it to the site. Once it's off-site, it's out of my control. It's under the Division of Housing. Then it becomes prefab. But I think at that point, you've changed the shipping container into something else. So personally, I have no problem with, accounting for that as a tiny home and fitting it under all the rules. I don't know what anyone else thinks, but the raw shipping container itself, that's not a tiny house.
Agreed, and that's what I thought you meant. So basically, in essence, if you're using the shipping container as material, if you will, to build your tiny home, that's acceptable. We've been doing that all along with modular construction as well. It's just, as Eric said, if you're just taking that shipping container, popping it on your land and saying that's my tiny house, right? That's not going to work. So there is an opportunity for shipping containers to be utilized through our program, right, to be certified as tiny homes. Does that address your question, Byron, or did I miss your question? And I've unmuted you.
It kind of addresses it, yes. But who will be inspecting this to make it sure that it's up to the appropriate code? Is that going to be?
That's going to be us, sir.
That's going to be so. So then, in other words, a shipping container can be used as the material to create a tiny home, is what I'm hearing you say.
That is correct, sir.
Good. Thank you very much. Answers my question.
Great. I thought I heard somebody else too.
No, that was me making noise. Sorry.
Well,
Mute yourself, Nate. Mute yourself. Thank you, sir. Eric, yes.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I think what Byron said is you can't use the shipping container as the material for the tiny home. I think it can be the raw material. You can build a tiny home out of a shipping container.
Correct.
And then it's going to fit into the usual protocol, whatever this committee comes up with in terms of manufacturing, inspection, and sales. And it just can't be the raw shipping container itself. That's not a tiny house.
Correct. So yeah, to be clear, it's going to go through our process, right? It has to be accounted for through the plans that are submitted, right? We have to make sure that whatever standards are adopted by this, well, not recommended by this committee and adopted by the State Housing Board are being met. We'll be inspecting that, whether it be us directly or through our partners, right? And then we'll be certifying it once it has met all our requirements, even if it's utilizing a shipping container as a starting point, right? The end product is what's going to be important. Is that now a tiny house as defined by statute, built to the standards that have been adopted by a State Housing Board? So hopefully that makes sense. Mark.
Just asking, and maybe this goes to Eric. Eric, if the container has a ESR report or is constructed or is underneath the G5, the ICC G5 guidelines and stuff, stuff being used as an alternate construction material. The IRC is not as clear on it as the IBC is. So basically, how would we want to look at this? Are we going to look at using one of those standards for verification of the container?
Well, I mean, that's up to this committee, but if it's an ISO approved shipping container, what that takes care of, we know the structural stability. We know, in my opinion, that'll hold up to any wind or snow load in Colorado, because those things, get shipped on a huge ship, 10 high, they'll handle the weight. We know they're non-combustible materials, so that should take care of the wildfire stuff. But we don't know anything about the interior construction, the electrical, the plumbing, the venting, the exiting, the windows, all that. And you'd have to modify the shipping container anyway, cut into it and put in windows and lintels and things like that. But it would be a starting point where we say if it's built a certain way, then it checks off these boxes.
The infill, I understand part. That's going to be done as no different than if we were building a module. I'm just a little bit more concerned about the container itself. The ISO 1496-1, yes, I'm very, very familiar with it. But it doesn't address deflection. It doesn't address flexural. This is probably going to be one of those subcommittee modes. Because we're going to have to, I think we have to look at it as far as as an alternate construction material. Sure, any day of the week. But how do we justify? Because like Eric said, the wind speeds, snow loads, and everything fluctuates so much in Colorado. The Core 10 skin on there, basically, according to the ISI S100, really doesn't have a value until it's tested. But I guess maybe that's a subcommittee for this, Mo. Unmute yourself, Mo.
Thank you for the reminder. It's a problem having two screens. Yeah. At the end of the day, whatever is used has to be code compliant, which, as you pointed out, has to meet our wind and snow requirements for whatever jurisdiction this structure is going into, which is another complicating piece that we're going to have to discuss, right? Which is going to make this very different from an IRC modular product. This is not potentially sitting in one place, right? So how do we account and not give local jurisdictions heartburn by ensuring that whatever structure that we certify that is installed in their jurisdiction actually meets those wind and snow load requirements, right? Especially if they're moving around. So we're going to have to think differently about this product than we do with modular, right? There might be some products that are built to the most stringent requirements out there, and therefore they get a statewide certification. I'm just throwing things out there. There's not saying this is where we may land. We may have some things that are just, approved in such a way where they're limited to just that location, and that homeowner wants it that way, right? There may be some that want something more regional. I don't know. So we're going to have to figure that out as well. That's going to be a complicating factor we got to consider. And Mark, if you lower your hand since we're done hearing from you for a bit, that'd be great. But in the chats, Tracy was pointing out about the park model issue, that a lot of folks are living in them full time. Yes, we understand that. That's one of the reasons why this bill was introduced. I can't tell you how many building officials I've heard from, not just Eric, about this very issue, trying to figure out what to do with them, right? But also the department regulatory agencies. We've got a couple of folks here, either currently with department regulatory agencies or formerly with, who've had this concern for a while as well, especially trying to figure out how you hook up utilities permanently in a permanent fashion or not, right? Those are issues that, even though the law doesn't recognize them to be allowed to be used for permanent use, nor the very codes that they're certified under allows them to be used as such. The reality they're being used as such is up to the local jurisdiction and will remain that way. That is not for us to deal with. Eric and I tried to find a way for them to give them some reprieve in that arena, but the RVI did not like what we came up with. So that part of the bill was removed. So it's really up to the locals, right? They just need to recognize that they're in a difficult position of trying to address affordable housing needs for the community, but at the same time, allowing folks to live even in RVs all year round, right? Or park models all year round, recognizing that they're not designed and constructed for that, nor are they legally recognized to be such, right? So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place to make those decisions. Now, with this particular bill, that might provide some relief in that they can say, okay, moving forward, we're not going to allow those particular units to be lived all year round because we're going to allow for this, the tiny home as certified by the state. But this is going to be a point forward. We're not going backwards, right? So we're not going to be able to go back and say, you, tiny home, fit our definition and can be certified by the state, or you are actually a park model. We're not getting into the whole world, right? We're going to start July 1st forward. You are a tiny home or you're not. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. So yeah, unfortunately, Tracy, this is not going to answer everybody's problems. It's going to help with the future, but it's not going to be able to go back.
I will continuously work to wrap my brain around that, but I appreciate it. And in your title, a tiny home is not, it starts to settle in there, and I appreciate you defining everything, so that works.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part? I didn't catch it, Tracy.
I said the title of this slide, a tiny home is not.
Yes.
If you just, I had to focus on that, Mo. You know what I mean? Because we do know how these things are being used.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. So education and outreach is going to be a big piece of this whole thing too. And that's why we got Sam, right? So Sam is going to make sure as we work to implement this, that we are communicating with all the local jurisdictions, anyone that's interested, to make sure it's clear to them what a tiny home is and is not, right? To eliminate that confusion. And then local jurisdictions can make informed decisions, right? About what they, and also not only local jurisdictions, consumers for that matter, right? Ultimately, it's who we're trying to protect, right? The consumers. Great discussion, guys. I'm looking in the chats. Sorry. Sean, you want to ask your question publicly? Or do you want to just keep that privately? I assume that's private. I will address it later. Yeah, and SK, and I'm sorry, I think your first name was actually Susan. Apologies if I got it wrong. She was commenting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just said, yeah, Susan Krasno.
Yes. Yeah, your point is excellent, that consumers do not understand that the park model is not a tiny house due to misleading marketing language. I've seen that. What's interesting is HUD has actually weighed in on this issue years ago, because it was concerned that these were getting confused with HUD manufactured homes. And I think the question was whether HUD should regulate them. And they ultimately decided not to. It decided not to, but requires a disclaimer to be included with every single park model, making it clear, right? That's basically not a HUD manufactured home. That's not a dwelling. That's designed for temporary seasonal use only. But that disclaimer is not a permanent thing, a fixed structure, unfortunately. You know, when it's sold to the consumer, it has to be, my understanding, present with the home. After that, so that home is resold, that second person is probably not going to know that. But that first person is supposed to know that. Whether that's happening or not, I don't know. So we're going to do our best to inform people about the differences and the limitations of a park model and let them make informed decisions. But as far as enforcing that realm, that's really left up to the industry itself, because that's not regulated by the state. So I hope that makes sense, at least this state. Maybe you guys will do it differently in Texas. And I think I covered, covered everything. If I missed anything, don't hesitate to raise your hand. Are we good on what a tiny home is not? Can we move on to the next slide? Oh, this is a very important slide. All right. Oops, I meant to delete that first one because that's not important. Apologies. You can disregard the first bullet. So we get into the foundations, and Eric, says we're going to need you again. And this is actually an opportunity where the rules can be written to clarify this. But Eric helped us address our punting issue. So as I mentioned early on in this presentation, this body, the Technical Advisory Committee, struggled mightily with coming up with a definition for a permanent foundation. And I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me. I'm not going to spend time looking for it. I should have had it prepared so people could see what the current definition in rule is, right? Which is now moot, right? Because now it's in the statute. So Eric took care of that punting situation and put something in statute. So this is not going to be easy to change if we have any issues with it, but we can clarify it, especially, for example, what section D means in each of these, because that's the difference between the two, right? They're all the same until you get to paragraph D. So for a permanent foundation, in essence, it's not to be removed from the ground or building. What does that mean, right? Versus a temporary foundation, which allows it to be removable from the ground or building. What does that mean, right? So there's opportunity there for clarification if needed. But Eric, you want to speak to this?
So I guess if there's a problem with that definition, I own that one, but the current definition, I was asking Mo in a different context, where the definition was, because for instance, a modular home has to go on a permanent foundation and a manufactured home can go on a permanent or temporary, depending on what you want. It turns out there is nothing in state law that defines it. There was a rule, but the way the definition and rule was structured, it said something about, resisting all loads or supporting the building, and a permanent foundation had to be designed by a Colorado engineer. Well, the loophole there is you just don't have an engineer design your foundation, then it becomes a temporary foundation. So that didn't work too well. So we tried to come up with something that made more sense. You could see they're the same generally. Support a building from underneath. That means it's going to take care of the snow load, the wind load, any lateral loads, seismic, etc. As well as if it's in a flood fringe or something, that it would resist those forces. Keep the building firmly affixed to the ground. But the difference is one is removable, one's not removable. So the problem is in my opinion, with the IRC right now, if you build a tiny house per the IRC, it has to transmit all the loads to a concrete, metal, all-weather wood, or masonry foundation that's extended below the frost depth of the jurisdiction. So you're putting a tiny home on a foundation that goes into the ground in our area that's 30 inches below the ground, and others it might be 36 or 48 inches below the ground. That's not how most tiny homes are built or intended to do. So we figured we'd have to come up with something that was appropriate for a tiny house. For one thing, it's on a chassis. Maybe there is a frost depth foundation that you then bolt the home to or strap down somehow and attach it. And then later, if you want to move it, it could be unbolted. I mean, even any house can be moved. It's just not that easy to move a house. Right now, when you look at a manufactured home, it either goes on a permanent foundation or you typically put it on piers, pedestals that are, above grade and that are strapped out on the side. That would be more like a temporary foundation. But that's going to be one of the trickiest parts here, is coming up with what is a permanent foundation that's intended to stay on site, that may not be 30 inches below the ground, but that could be considered permanent. And deciding whether a tiny home is a permanent one, which has implications for its tax structure and how it's regulated, registration and stuff, and which one is intended to be a temporary one that would be taxed and registered differently, that maybe in 3 months they take it and move it somewhere else. So that's at least the background of what we were trying to do. Obviously, there's problems in any definition, and this one, at any time there's a loophole, clever people are going to get involved, including attorneys. A permanent foundation is designed or intended to be used permanently. Well, what does that mean? How do you get to someone's intent? What's the design? They can say, well, I intended it to be permanent, and then I changed my mind. So, it's clearly not a perfect definition, but it's the best we could come up with, and we thought it was at least better than the current definition in state rules. Well, you seem to be frozen right now in my video, but I think Margarita wants to say anything. So
Yeah, I noticed the same. Everybody's frozen, so I was wondering. So my question actually is, it seems that foundation should be part of the package, the ultimate package that comes with the tiny house, right? Because otherwise it's going to be a third party and might not be perhaps, the foundation itself could be a problem once you install the tiny homes bought off site and move it into the place. So how are what is the conversation at this point regarding offering a foundation as part of the tiny house or the tiny home package itself?
I'm sorry, I don't know who that question was designated for. I was kicked out of my own meeting, so I missed the ending of what Eric had to say, and I missed most of what you had to say, Margarita, so apologies.
And I was wondering about the foundation, if it should be for us manufacturers and or sellers to be offered as part of the package coming with a tiny home. I mean, just to make sure that it will hold the house and that it might be, as Eric mentioned, support all the snow and wind and the load, the dead load that the house is going to be on itself. So are you expecting to be this part of the package itself?
Yeah, I didn't quite follow everything you had to say, Margarita, to be honest with you, but obviously there's going to be, as Eric mentioned, that this is a complicated area we're going to have to really figure out. So there's a lot of opportunity here, but we're going to have to figure out some effective guardrails as well to make clear what is, when and how one is utilized over the other and what one is versus the other, right? The statute now provides a framework, a pretty solid framework to operate within. We just now need to fill in the details, right? That's not going to happen today, but we will get there for sure. And Jim Wiegand, if you're listening, I chatted you too. I've been kicked out of this meeting as a panelist. If you could re-add me as a panelist, it'd be greatly appreciated. So apologies for the technical difficulties. My computer, my laptop, and the security in our building don't get along. And so on occasion, I seem to be getting kicked off of our hard wiring here for internet capability. Anyway, we'll continue the best we can. Let me get back to sharing the screen. Oh, thank you, Jim. I guess I'm back as a co-host. I just lost all the way it's set up. Thanks, Jim. All right, so
Mark has
yes.
his hand. Mark has his hand. Mark Lindsay. I don't know if he wanted to say anything or he just has his hand up.
Well, I was just asking. I wanted to basically get a clarification, or maybe make a clarification for Margarita's comment. Are we, if the tiny home owner has its own land, and these are usually installed on that, it's more of a what we consider the fundamental permanent foundation. But if they're set up in, I hate to use this word, Mo, you're going to hit me, but parks, at that point, would that be, I mean, is that what we're trying to address, Margarita, is if we have a community where there's a community of tiny homes, are we going to put in these permanent concrete foundations for these tiny homes?
Margarita, you're on mute if you wanted to answer that.
No, I got it. I mean, the conversation should move forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, these things are going to be used in a variety of settings, right? Somebody's backyard, a tiny home community, a mobile home park. And it's okay to say park, Mark. Just don't say trailer. Just don't say trailer park. Trailer park's the term we're all trying to avoid.
I know that term, Mo.
So, yeah, in some settings, it makes sense to be on a permanent foundation. And like, as I mentioned earlier, like that's the reality too, right? Is somebody who wants to build to IRC Appendix Q 2018 And once it's on a permanent foundation, that pathway already exists. They don't need to wait for any of this, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind as well. For everything else, right, we got a lot of figuring out to do. More permanent versus temporary, keeping that in the back of your mind. So just something to really think about. This is going to be a complicated piece that we got to unravel, which I'm guessing why it has not been effectively regulated in any jurisdiction that I'm aware of. So if anyone has come up with a magic sauce for standards, right, for the construction of these things and the installation of these things, by all means, share that information with this group. Get it to me and I'll disseminate it to the members so we can digest it and figure out if we can just adopt it wholesale or if there's some things we need to modify and adopt for the state that makes more sense for us, okay? So a lot of opportunity here, but it's also where all the headaches that really are, as far as I can tell. So I'm sharing my screen here. This is can you guys see my other screen? This is actually the current definition for a tiny home that's now moot and no longer actually is functional because of what's been put in the statute. But this is what we've had in place for a long time. And as you can see, we clearly punted. Sorry, TAC members, we clearly punted. So Eric has made it a little bit more clear, in my opinion. Question is it clear enough? So I think there is room to clarify that subparagraph that I shared earlier. And so we'll have those conversations to do just that. Anyway, thank you, Eric. Anything else you want to add about foundations? Excuse me.
The only thing I would add on foundations, I think someone else pointed out that typically under the current rules, all the offsite construction is regulated by the Division of Housing. The onsite construction is the local jurisdiction if there is one, including the footing and foundation, as well as utility connections, additions, stairs, rails, etc. So that would probably be the same if maybe we can come up with something that works as a pre-designed by the manufacturer permanent foundation to be done on site. But that part is still going to be probably the part permitted by the local jurisdiction and inspected, because that's where the line is. We'll look at the on-site stuff and where there is local jurisdiction, and then the state will look at the prefabricated stuff.
Good stuff. Thank you, Eric. You might be positioning yourself to work with the subcommittee of TAC working on foundations and installations. Very good. Was there any other people with their hands up? Sorry, I gotta refind all my chats and participants.
Looks like Byron has his hand up.
Byron. Sorry, give me a second. Let me find everybody. Byron, go ahead, sir. You should be able to mute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. This foundation issue is definitely something that needs to be addressed in an appropriate manner. But I do want to point out, I've had tiny homes that people have been living in Colorado for over 8 years. Some have been simply fastened to the ground with RV anchors, the screw anchors. Some have not been fastened to the ground at all. That's up to my clients to do. It's not my responsibility. No one has ever had a problem with being blown over or any other issue with the high winds and things of that nature. I'm not saying we don't need a foundation, but I think overthinking it and getting so carried away with these super big concrete foundations that are way down below the frost line is kind of overkill, in my opinion. Yes, I think we should have a great foundation, but making this a big sticking point that is going to require massive amounts of money, that's very burdensome for someone who wants an affordable tiny home. I think maybe this needs to be addressed in a more sensible manner as well, rather than just a technical manner. Like I said, not trying to circumvent having a good foundation. Right now I have one of my clients in Walsenburg that is doing an unbelievable concrete foundation that was set on it last week. It's my first tiny home that's been put on a permanent foundation. But I just like to point that out, that there's hundreds of tiny homes around Colorado, and have not had an adequate foundation by definition that you're trying to create. And I just want to share that for everyone to think about.
That's very helpful, Byron. It's important to note, though, that there have been tiny homes blown over. I've heard and seen about them. They may not be your tiny homes, but I have seen it. And the way the statute is written, to have no foundation, I don't think is an option. Can we create some wiggle room for what a temporary foundation is? Absolutely. I think the opportunity exists here. But at the same time, there needs to be some mechanism supporting it, I would think. And I'll even go on to say that even a HUD code home, which is usually bigger than a tiny home, also has to be at a minimum on a temporary foundation. So there are reasons for this. Even though people may have been getting away with it safely for some time, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work that way in every jurisdiction. I can assure you in Park County, if one of these things is not tightened down, it's going to go over, most likely. I've seen camping trailers go over easily where I live. So just keep that in mind. So geography is going to have a large part of this as well. Tracy.
I was just going to say that's where I'm kind of hoping to be able to bring some actual collected data from the industry to the team, to the TAC team, from a weight perspective to a square footage perspective, what these things weigh. You don't quite, easily blow over a, 12,500 pound or 18,000 pound tiny house that has a footprint of, let's say, 192 square feet, 24 by 8 feet. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping, that we'll be able to, a little bit to what Byron said, safety is very, very important to our industry. And it's important to me. So that's one of the things that I think the team will learn about me and Austin and what the tiny home industry is trying to help accomplish with these rules. We also want the safety perspective as well, but we also are not trailers that have 2-inch walls. We're 2x4 framing with 5-inch walls, and we've got a little bit of weight, and we want to tie them down as well. But I just want to kind of remind some of my teammates that it's not a 600 square foot unit, if you will. These are small units. So hopefully we'll be able to add some value from the tiny house industry into that data collection for everybody.
No, it's incredibly helpful. Thank you for that. But yeah, I mean, we can have that discussion. Actually, going back to the statute, I don't see where it has to be on a temporary or permanent foundation. They could be missing it though. But we'll definitely unpack that further.
And to be
yeah,
fair,
data,
Mo, I did see that shed blown over on the news. So,
yeah.
but to be fair, it was a shed, everybody. It was a shed. But I saw it, Mo. I saw it.
Yeah, no, I've actually seen tiny homes too, not just sheds, but yes. The wind can be a powerful thing, but yeah, in the vast majority, nothing happens to most homes, quite frankly. But when it does happen, guess whose door they come knocking on? You guess the state, you guess right. And of course, the local building department. But yeah, if data is important, what has been successfully implemented other jurisdictions and states, countries for that matter, we're here to be a sponge about everything and just find a pathway that works best for us, right? But always keeping safety first and foremost. But at the same time, we don't want to create something so cumbersome. It's hard to implement or even build in the state. So at the same time, we're trying to get these products out to consumers as well. So Tracy, do you have anything else or can you lower your hand? I don't know if you heard me, Tracy. Oh, thank you. All right. So obviously, foundation installation is going to be a huge, huge topic for us here. Now, there's some other important factors. I think Byron and Dan might have mentioned some of this. This is language they actually inserted into the bill. Do either one of you want to talk about your thoughts on this particular language? So these are things we have to consider as we come up with recommendations and ultimately what the State Housing Board adopts. We need to consider these factors. Anyone? Mark? You beat Byron, so Mark, you're first. Oh, sorry, is that Byron? Sorry, that's Byron. Go ahead, Byron.
Okay, I'm just quickly scanning these. And I think with the new bill, custom tiny homes are going to have to be a thing of the past, unfortunately, because being able to afford to have every single plan engineered is probably going to take it past the affordable housing range. So there's that challenge. You know, for all these years, every single one of my houses are custom built. They are not engineered, but they are drawn by a sort of, you know, licensed architect that knows all the right things to make sure it could be engineered, and I can have them engineered should I want to, and I will have to in the future. I do have concern that since so much of this appears to be heavily leaning on the modular side, that we may be forced into a position that we're going to have 2 or 3 models and building like modulars, and it'll lose the flavor of what a tiny home on wheels, a movable tiny home, is really intended to be. You know, I'm not sure that Simplicity Tiny Homes is going to survive through this whole transition of having to have everything engineered. And I'm just concerned that too much regulation here may take movable tiny homes out of the affordable status. That's yet to be seen. I'm not saying anything negative, but I hope this is considered as all these rules are developed.
Yeah, we'll be considering that. Of course, our intent is not to drive business out, just to make sure it's safe. And I'm sure my modular folks online can speak to some of this, but just a reminder again, I mentioned this a few times. One thing, we can't go back and change the statute, right? Secondly, is for modular, you know, we have folks that highly customize products in a low count. I don't quite know what you mean by engineered. Been using that term quite a bit. Like to hear what you think it means and how it applies. But we have small producers. I think I mentioned this a few times during the bill discussion, and we have some really big producers. We have some people that have a variety of highly customized products and some that don't. We have schools that build modulars. We have people that build one a year in their backyard. So we account for all of that. We want to account for all of that. We don't want to lose any of that. So we'll try to make sure that tiny homes, it's the same situation, right? It's going to be similar in a lot of regards, but it's also going to be different in a lot of ways as well. So we just got to balance all of that as best as possible. And, you know, you and others will be an important voice to help guide us. So just keep that in mind. Keep an open mind. But information is power as well. So provide information that's helpful and constructive. It would all be considered. Anyone else want to weigh in on this, especially from the modular side? Nate, you got your hand up?
Yeah, you know, I want to kind of give a voice of encouragement to everybody kind of on the tiny home side. You're kind of walking into, you know, some structure and things like that that's new to you, and certainly, you know, can be a little bit daunting at times as far as, you know, the level of detail and regulation that we have around, you know, modular homes and manufactured homes in the state. But I just wanted to give you the perspective of having done this for a decade in this group. It is a process. Everybody's heard. Oftentimes we find ourselves at some pretty amazing outcomes as far as, you know, ways that we can, you know, all still function, but put some bounds and some safety around some things. And so I can see just, you know, listening to you guys going, oh man, this is a lot sometimes. Hang in there. Just, you know, it is a long process. Like Mo says, these meetings, you know, go on for quite some times. And We get into the weeds pretty deep. But I will say, after doing it for 10 years, I've never gotten out of one saying, you know what, that wasn't the right outcome. So that's all. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Nate. That's greatly appreciated. Tim.
Yeah, hi. From a building department perspective, I understand, the comments from the builders that these are small, 400 square foot or less, with a loft typically, but still the footprint is small, but in a equitable standpoint. So if someone came into my jurisdiction and wanted to build a 400 square foot detached accessory structure that has a loft in it, and like we're doing ADUs now more often, and they're going to go through the IRC, International Residential Code, we would require them to do the full design, not necessarily engineering, because you could have an architect or a good carpenter do the framing plans, but you need the foundation down below frost depth. So from an equitable standpoint, my perspective from a jurisdiction enforceability, we need to be, pushing at least to have a division of housing in the local communities, treat them the same way. Those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, well said, Tim. What we don't want to create is a situation where it's so complicated, it's hard to regulate, right? That's not going to be helpful to anyone in the long term either. So just keep that in mind as well. You don't want to bend over backwards so much that you end up snapping something, right? So this is going to be, there's a lot to work with here and a lot to do, but it's going to be incredibly challenging for us to thread the needle as best as possible, right? To meet everybody's needs. We're not going to meet everybody's needs. That, in fact, is impossible. Having been doing this for 20 plus years, right? But we're going to do the best we can. We're going to hear everybody. We're going to try to account for every variable presented. And the reality is this, though, too, folks. We're not going to get it perfectly right the first time, right? So this is not all or nothing situation. Just keep that in mind. We got to get something effective by July 1st. But just like you're going to learn from the modular industry, we've been fine-tuning this stuff for decades, right? You don't get it right the first time, right? We learn. We try to do better the second time, the third time. We just keep going. Every year, we'll be revisiting our requirements and our process. Is it working like it should be? Where are the sticking points? What do we need to do to change that and address it while still keeping consumer safety in mind, right? So just keep that in mind as well. We're not going to get a home run on the first swing. That never happens. Great discussion, though. Great dialogue, folks. But keep the positivity going, to Nate's point. Keep it positive, folks. We'll get there. Sorry, I'm trying to catch up on the chats. I missed quite a bit. I'm not going to be able to read all this and talk at the same time. Mark Lindsay, but if anybody wants to say something important they said in the chat or questions they raise in chat, please raise your hand. If it's something just private you want to talk to me about, try to hit me up separately in an email or call me later. Thanks. Mark, did you just drop your hand?
Yeah, well, I dropped it because I'm here, Mo. Basically, for Tracy and for Margarita and the new members on here, what Nate and Tim were talking about is very, it explains this committee very well. There's a broad spectrum of views on this committee, and it'll go from the most technical side to the practicality side of this. And for the gentleman that was asking about engineering, this committee can look at cookbooking these out of the IRC, which basically, if there is a way to do it with the snow loads and the wind loads and everything in Colorado, may be a plausible way to do this. But just to give them, so there's no, oh my God, what did I get into? That this committee is very, very broad and very open-minded. And with all the locals we have on here, we have avenues to take. How do they feel about this? And one thing that you will learn about Mo and the other people on here, they are very open to conversation, no matter what it is. So if you have an opinion, you have something, please keep bringing it up. It's great information. I've already got about 1.5 pages of notes.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, for that. We got a couple of attendees that have raised their hands as well. Thank you for being so patient. Apologies if I've been missing you. Sean, I'm going to leave you for last if you don't mind. I'm going to jump to some of these attendees. I want to hear their voices as well. Austin, we'll start with you. You just need to unmute yourself now.
All right, thank you. Hey, so I believe the gentleman that just spoke right before me kind of nailed what I was going to say, but I mean, I've been building these for about 8 or 10 years. And to Byron's point, I can't honestly think of, besides this current project I have in Colorado Springs, I can't think of building the same home twice. But the one common ground I think we all have, even with modular building, permanent foundations, code department, all that is there are some basics that you just don't overlook. And I mean, that's part of what this whole code thing's all about. Part of it was snow load, building to earthquake conditions and hurricane conditions. The idea when we were starting in this industry and we're building these homes on these permanent foundations, these trailers, is you don't need it blowing apart driving down the road going 70 miles an hour. So I guess for me, I just was trying to clarify this whole foundation thing. I know there's 2 parts to this foundation. You've got the concrete, or however it's anchored to the soil, to the earth, right, the ground. But you also have these trailers that are, and this is that word that keeps popping up, that are engineered foundations. So I would imagine, you know, if you're building on a trailer, I mean, it would only make sense that the home is permanently structurally attached to the trailer, i.e. The trailer is not designed to come off the home. The building's not designed to come off the trailer. It becomes one. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding when we're talking about foundations and whatnot. I think the common ground here is we're building a home. We want it to be structurally sound. We'd want to live in it ourselves or sleep in it ourselves and know that there's not going to be any issues. But I was just trying to understand the common ground here when we're talking about custom building. What are some basic standards that we can adhere to? And then we're saying, you know, this word engineer. It's a popular word in the tiny home industry because you're not always repeating a cookie cutter. You're not always repeating a build, but you got to have your basic foundation and your basic fundamentals, your processes. They got to be structurally sound. I guess is kind of what I'm getting at.
Well said. Yeah, this is gonna be a lot of ground to cover here, Austin and company. And we're going to get into the weeds on a lot of this stuff. What does this mean? What's the impact of it, right? Does it make sense? Does the structure need to be tied to the earth at any point? And if so, what does that look like, either temporarily or permanently, right? We're going to be getting into all that stuff. So thank you for that, Austin. Robin, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. And I had a couple of 2 questions, actually. I was talking with David Tompos of ICC-NTA at the ICC annual meeting, and we were talking about the oversight for modulars and the oversight for tiny houses on wheels. And the idea was that the way NOAA does their oversight process doesn't fit into the category of a large manufacturer that punches out a lot of homes, but would fit pretty well into a smaller manufacturer or a school or an owner builder. And his thought, and I don't know whether it's possible to do this, but his thought and my thought too was that there could be a dual oversight, one for the Clayton and larger homes and one for the smaller home builder. And then the other thing, I was talking with Eric Freed about the foundation, and he was saying that you know, maybe they don't have to go below the frost line because they're on a chassis, and you know, they're not sitting on the ground, they're up off the ground, so that the heat transfer isn't going to happen. And if there is some heaving going on from freezing and thawing, it's not such a big deal on a smaller 200 to 400 square foot tiny home.
Thank you, Robin. I do want to clarify a few things about your oversight comments and suggestion. There's only one oversight. It's the state of Colorado, right? So there's only one entity that has authority to have oversight over any of these products, whether it be modular or tiny homes. That can't be changed unless you want to change it statutorily, right? But if you're talking about within the state's oversight and the partners it works with and how it does it, and distinguishing between larger manufacturers and smaller manufacturers, we're all ears. But once again, it can't be so complicated that it's hard for us to keep track of, because ultimately the state is responsible. So you guys have any ideas other than say, separate the two? That sounds good, but what the devil is in the details? How do you do that effectively? Right? So think on that, Robin, and whoever else you mentioned. Think on how that would be done effectively to not create confusion, especially on the side that has to work with it to enforce it and apply it, not just the users. So think of both sides. You wear two hats when you're sitting on the technical advisory committee. One hat is actually three hats, really. One is the consumer, right? One is the manufacturer, seller, installer. And the third is the state, who's also ultimately responsible for certifying this and ensuring local governments are comfortable with that, so they don't feel like they have to tear the structures apart. Does that make sense? You'd be wearing multiple hats here. Therein lies the challenge. So if you guys can come up with a process that works, distinguishing between large, whatever that number is, versus small, right? I'm all ears. I just haven't seen any presented in that format before.
Well, thank you. I did mean that the state was the ultimate, but there are certain ways that the modular homes are inspected in the factories and may not be conducive to a backyard or something like that, or a smaller manufacturer. So yeah, it would still be oversight from the state, but then there'd be the current oversight process, but maybe a second oversight process or system for the smaller manufacturer and the owner builder, that kind of thing. So that's what I had
Just
in
be
mind.
careful about using the term oversight because it's very broad. I'd be very specific. Are you talking about registration? Are you talking about plan reviews? Are you talking about inspections? And I did hear you finally say inspections. So I'm guessing that's where you're primarily focused. Are you talking about certification? There's a lot that goes into oversight. There's a lot of moving parts. So I would be very careful about the terminology. Don't use the word oversight. Use specifically what you're trying to target. Are you talking about inspections, plan reviews, registrations, certification, etc.? That makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I was mainly considering inspection and
Got it.
certification.
Got it. That's very helpful. Thank you. And sorry, Nate, I just saw your hand go up. I haven't got a couple people that been on there. Sean, I know I've been promising you for a while. Sean, you're up. Can you unmute, Chuck? Sean, I don't know if you're still at your computer.
Okay, I think I'm there.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, sorry for taking so long to get to you. Apologies.
Oh no, that's fine. I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about tiny home foundation design, right? So I'm just going to kind of spitball it here. And we have basically in Colorado, local jurisdictions pretty well dictate what a home or a permanent structure needs to sit on. And that is pretty well outlined in some of the modular and manufactured guidelines. And then going into a lease community or a jurisdiction that doesn't require a permanent foundation, there is a temporary foundation, so, you know, pads and XI2 or tie downs or whatever. I would, unless I'm missing it, I think best place to start is to start off with those two and see how those can work with both permanent installation and maybe, for lack of a better term, non-permanent installation. Similar that is already on the books. I mean, because ultimately we're trying to make sure whatever somebody's living in is safe. And then it's probably a lesser consideration, but I think it still must be a consideration, is I keep hearing the word affordable housing and all that kind of stuff. And in our business, that's just a innocuous term that talks about a lot of different things. But ultimately it's people's investment, and from a financing standpoint, I think it's going to vary whether they're putting it into a tiny home community. I guess my other question is, can these go into standard manufactured housing communities? I don't see why they couldn't, as long as the community operator was okay with it. But they'll also go on private property, which I think, again, from an investment standpoint, long-term for the homeowner, they need to be hooked up to some long-term operable utilities. As far as backyard designs where people are building stuff in the backyard, I certainly think there should be a mechanism for that. And I know that's what we're discussing through. I think those inspections and things like that are going to be interesting to figure out, because I don't know a lot of local jurisdictions that are going to want to come out and inspect something that's going to be moved up in the mountains. So it is a unique industry, and I'm anxious to learn more about it. But keeping the cost down is always, Nate and I being in the industry of selling homes, that's always a piece of it. And I don't want anybody to lose sight that we always try and think of that.
That's great, Sean. Thank you. If anyone that's already spoken and doesn't have anything else to say, if you don't mind putting your hand down, that'd be greatly appreciated. So I can separate you out from folks that newly want to be recognized. Thank you. Wow, that just knocked everybody out. Great. Well, thank you guys for all the comments. Nate, you got your hand up.
I guess I will make one point then. One thing I wanted to say to the newer tiny home folks, as far as the inspection aspect of oversight from the state, is that there seems to be a little bit of a concern as, well, how are the smaller manufacturers, or how is the guy that wants to build one in his backyard going to be inspected? That is the Division of Housing. They will do those inspections. If somebody wants to build an IRC code modular homes on jack stands in their backyard and call themselves register as a factory, Division of Housing will come out and do those inspections. And so, there's no scale issue, from the DOH's inspection program. And so just know that it doesn't have to be some big manufacturing operation.
Well said. Thank you. This is a growing opportunity, folks. We're going to grow with each other. You're new to us. We're new to you, right? And with newness comes some anxiety. Trust me, I've got anxiety over some of this, but we're going to make it work. We're going to figure it out together. All right. Tracy, you got your hand up?
I do. So first of all, kudos to you on slide number 8, Mo. You really nailed that one. Important factors to consider. I think if all the non-tiny housers, which all of you guys so far have been very, very wonderful in kind of acknowledging that, we're probably our own little industry in itself. And I can see that just some general education and knowledge about our industry, it'll probably be good for us to share that, with you guys. And I just want to kind of mention those of you that don't know about our industry, a lot of times we're really trying to, hold ourselves accountable to building to NFPA 1192 from an RV code for our RVs that are getting certified. We're also holding ourselves accountable and getting inspected for ANSI 119.5, which is RV park model code, right? Which is not a tiny home. Totally get it, Mo. But we're also holding ourselves accountable to incorporating IRC from a building perspective, like what Austin was saying earlier, anchoring, our framing to the foundation, which in our case is engineered foundation trailer, right? Like a trailer made. And so when we're, doing that, we're holding ourselves accountable to multiple different codes. So this is actually an exciting thing for us. So I kind of want to give some of the other industry folks that are not familiar with the tiny house industry just a little bit of background on us and why this is so impactful to all of us small builders. It is because we are holding ourselves accountable. Now, granted, Mo, you brought this up earlier, and I acknowledge it. There's always a bad apple in every bunch, and that's why we're here. Why we need regulation, and why we need some. And maybe I shouldn't say that word. I apologize, but why we need some guidance, right, in our industry, to make sure that we're taking care of consumers, as well as small businesses and owners and things of that nature, and just fellow Colorado folks. So I do want to say that for those of you that don't know, a lot of us that are doing things correctly, or what we perceive as correctly, do pay for third-party inspections currently, where we do have inspectors come into our facilities. They do come in and inspect us. We do document. For instance, I have hundreds and hundreds of pictures. I mean, I got 500 pictures on 192 square feet of a build, right? It's what we do to help through our certifications. We go through proper testing to make sure our plumbing and our electrical and structure safety, all of that is meeting all of these different codes. So in the chat, somebody did ask if any of the facilities would be willing to have you guys tour, and Byron over at Simplicity has already had tours out in Lyons. We're out in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We've got, builder Mitchcraft out in Fort Collins. We've got several builders, Durango, Rocky Mountain. So there are builders out there that would be happy to invite different folks in, maybe schedule some tours, things of that. If you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about our industry. And so, yeah. I just kind of wanted to share that, because I feel like it's important just to give a little bit of background of how we're currently operating. But you did nail this slide, so I'm kind of hoping everybody will take that into consideration. Everything that you pointed out here, Mo, is perfect, along with us sharing a little bit about how we're currently doing things to keep things legal, right? Or doing our best.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Look, the credit actually goes to Sam for making sure he copied the statute and pasted it into the slide. I just changed the title of it, but this is straight out of the statute. So the credit really goes to the tiny home industry for making sure that these specific points, emphasizing the uniqueness and importance of tiny homes, was clearly spelled out in the statute. So the thanks goes to them. And thank you for bringing up the the opportunity to visit and manufacture tiny homes. I think James McLean, one of the TAC members, asked that question, and you've offered. I'm guessing it sounds like you offered Byron, yourself, and some others, but it would probably make sense to, of course, individually, anybody can contact any of these tiny home producers and schedule an appointment. But if you guys would like to do a field trip as a group, let me know, right? And I can work with, and I know Byron's personally invited me a couple of times. So, we can pick somebody, a manufacturer that makes sense. That's located in a place where we can get to rather easily, and visit and go through their process, just to give you an idea of what that process looks like. It might make sense to pick Byron. He's been doing it for a long time in Colorado, but I'm up to suggestions, open to suggestions, I should say. But yeah, if you want to do a group one, let me know and I can organize that. If you want to do it individually, go ahead and do that individually. Tracy's rattled off a few, and I think Tumbleweed was mentioned earlier in our conversations as well. They might be the bigger producer of tiny homes in the state. Park models, that is. It'd be interesting to see if they convert to this particular product that we're talking about. I don't unfortunately see anybody from Tumbleweed on here. I was hoping we would get somebody from them. I see a couple of late joiners, so perhaps one of them is representing Tumbleweed. I don't know. Anyway, just something to think about. There were a few of the thoughts I had, but I've lost track of them. It'll come to me later. John, you had your hand up, and Tracy, you don't mind lowering your hand if you're done, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. I just want to make sure that sounds like it's well established that any foundational rules, whatnot, should be based on use case. And I think it's very individual. I think it's going to be easier than people think to bracket how tiny homes might be used and how that relationship with a local building inspector, a local agency, can help provide those inspections. Because what I've noticed this last year in the modular industry is the state was overwhelmed with the amount of plan inspection and review that they have to do, which then makes it a challenge to get in the field to inspect sets. Then it makes it a challenge to get back in the field and inspect for full occupancy. So I hope with our group through education outreach somehow, we try to make it maybe a little easier for Sam going forward, because I think his department's going to be burdened even more so as we add more product to his department to inspect and issue stickers on. So, yeah.
No, well said, John. The good news is, the bad news, we'll start with the bad news, right? Is the current structure, for those of you new to this, has been stressed, right? We're at 2012 staffing. So literally the staffing that we had in 2012, when the modular industry had shrunk after the Great Recession, our staffing shrank with it, but has stayed there since. Mercifully for the industry and the consumers of Colorado, it has rebounded beautifully, especially in the last few years. And we want to keep seeing it go. And we want to see tiny home take the same current, right? But we're still at 2012 staffing, right? And we've been working on that. But as you can imagine, the state process for hiring is not easy. But we're working through that. And we have partners in that. We're actually working with OEDIT. OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade I mentioned, wants to see their bill succeed and all innovative housing flourish. So they're actually going to hire an engineer for us to use, an engineer in training. We have what's called a decision item that the governor's budget was publicized today. Or should be at some point in time today. The budget's coming out. Guess who's in the budget? Us, right? We've asked for 4 more staff, 2 engineers and 2 inspectors, right? So that's great news. We're heading in that direction, John, to address your concerns. But the beauty about the tiny home bill itself is it came with its own FTE, so its own staff, right, to help implement that bill. So we're actually getting 4 staff just for the tiny home bill, a plan review, an inspector, and a high-level administrator to help us at a high level, and a program assistant. So that's the good news. But they're staggered. Their hiring is staggered. We're starting with the engineer first. Oh, sorry, the high-level program administrator first, then the engineer second. So we're going to get a lot of bodies on here soon. And the good news about, and this is not finalized yet, is the 4 that I talked about from the decision item, which is basically a budget request, right? Because we only have so much. So what's interesting about our model is we also have another request in play that I won't get into now, but we bring in money from fees, right? And that money goes towards administering the program, right?
Right.
But we bring in more money than actually we're allowed to spend because of the budget. So our budget is set every year in advance, right? And that's one of the problems we're working to address as well separately. It's like, we don't understand why we have this cap if we have enough money coming in industry and their needs are such where we need to spend more money to help keep up with their demand. Does that make sense? So we have this cap that we're trying to remove as well. So we have a lot going on at the same time. The good news is it's all progressing in the direction we want it to. The bad news is it takes time, right? But by July 1st of next year, coincidentally, when we're implementing tiny homes, or should have implemented tiny homes, we should have a different landscape with how much staffing we're actually bringing on board. Some of them will be coming on before then, but a lot of them will be coming on after July 1st. So I hope that makes sense to everybody, but great. I'm glad you brought that up, John. Nate?
2 items. Does that request that you do budget-wise, is that end up being a bill to change it, or is that just more through the JVC?
It has to be
Really?
built.
Okay.
Exactly. So,
Okay.
so this is the process, and I'll try to keep it as short as possible. It's quite a lengthy process, and it's not easy, but we have to get our budget change request submitted internally. It has to be DOLA approved. It then goes to the governor's office, specifically the Office of State Procurement and Budget, OSPB. They have to approve it, which they did. They asked some very difficult, challenging questions, as they should, right? In order for that to happen, because of course they're trying to maintain making sure that the state's financially sound, right? And then once it gets approved, it gets into the governor's draft budget. The budget is not formal. It doesn't mean anything until it gets through the legislative process. But that draft budget is coming out today.
Right.
That then has to go before the legislator. You probably have heard the long-term long bill, right? So the legislative body, the Joint Budget Commission, a committee in particular, has to consider that. And it has to get.
So it gets written into the governor's bill as his recommendation, and then hopefully ends up in the long bill by JBC.
Exactly. And then once it gets in the long bill, then it has to get approved by the legislative body, obviously.
Right. Okay.
Right. Passes a bill. And that particular, when that bill is up for consideration, everything else pretty much ceases during our legislative process. And the focus is on getting the long bill finalized and then out. So we still have a journey. But the good news too is, and of course, that the long bill becomes law, that's not effective until July 1st. So we're talking about next fiscal year. So
the next question.
But real quick though, what we've asked for is 2 of the 4 positions that I mentioned to be a supplemental request. So if approved by the JBC, we can actually hire those folks earlier. We're still talking about timeline, probably no earlier than April, I'm guessing, if that happens.
Next question is, and hit this one really quick. There's there's housing funds in the ballot issue. I don't want to get into the details of that at all right now, but is there anything for this group come out of that? Have you looked into that? Not
right now.
Okay, moving on.
The big fish right now is we got to fry is tiny home implementation.
Yeah. Okay.
There are other things that we have to consider, but we can't get distracted from that.
And last comment goes to the on the slide that you have up right now on number 1. And what I want to remind kind of everybody from a tiny home perspective is that even though this group gets into a lot of codes and we're talking about foundations and stuff like that, it falls under the Division of Housing. And Division of Housing, I think Mo would probably agree, you can probably say it better than me, their number 1 goal is to deal with affordable housing in Colorado. And this just falls under that as one of the many things that we have to do. And so I guess that point shouldn't be lost on anyone, that the goal of all this, a big goal, is to find ways for us to keep tiny homes affordable and accessible to people as an option for housing. So that's all.
No, well said. The Department of Local Affairs is geared as a state agency to work closely with local communities, right? That's why it's beautiful that this is all within the Department of Local Affairs. But more importantly, as Nate said, so we have those relationships with local communities, right? And we want to make sure that we're serving them ultimately. But at the same time, the Division of Housing has a goal of affordable housing, but it has to be, right, also safe, secure, and attainable, right? So we have to keep that in mind as well. So this is being woven into the fabric of the Division of Housing and the Department of Local Affairs, right? Which are designed in such a way to provide resources to local communities, right? But at the same time, working to create affordable housing as described. So yeah, I don't think you can get a better fit for a state agency. That's my humble opinion. If anyone disagrees, you can take that to the legislators. So I think this is the best possible hands that you're in. And we'll work together to make it as effective as possible. And I see a couple of people, attendees with their hands up. I'm going to start with Austin Baker.
Hey, thank you. So I agree with what you guys were just saying in regards of affordable. That's a word that gets thrown around a lot. And like anything, there's a lot of different meanings for that word. You can still build a well-structured home and build it just as secure and just as strong as a $600,000 home, and it still not cost as much. I mean, there's a way to build strong and structurally sound. But what I wanted to bring up is have you guys thought at all? You talked about budgets and whatnot. You talked about 4 new people coming on board, inspecting. I think that's amazing that you're moving this quick, this fast. That's some good footwork. Have you ever thought about possibly allowing some of these home builders to possibly get certified through that group of people you might be hiring to help with some of the low staff in regards to getting out and doing some inspections and certifying or looking at some of these homes that are built. That could probably help you guys with some extra hands until you guys are able to get to a staffing level. Is that even a topic or a consideration?
It's a great question, Austin. Actually, we already have a process for certified manufacturers in the state. Only problem is that process is broken. So I didn't identify it specifically in this slide deck because it is not, has nothing to do with 1242. But I haven't, remember the cleanup I was talking about, just the general cleanup I mentioned earlier? This is squarely one of those items, right? So we already have a process where manufacturers on the modular side, which I've had to freeze because we've had to decertify folks that weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, and in a very destructive way. So we put a pause to the whole process until we work with the TAC to come up with a process that's better. And here's the beauty, the timing, we're going to get some new ideas from you folks where this is all new to you, right? So there are currently certified factories still operating. We're just not adding any new ones to them until we figure out how to make this a better process. Because at the end of the day, the locals are relying on us, right? And if those certified factories are producing products that are not acceptable in those local jurisdictions, then the whole process doesn't look good, right? Because they're trusting us to do the right thing. And we're trusting the manufacturers to do the right thing. And if that trust is broken, then we got to figure out how to make this a better mechanism. Because it comes down to trust ultimately. But we got to create a situation where it's not just trust, it's trust and verify, right? Ronald Reagan, is that what he said? So we got to come up with a better process for doing just that. So that option has been on the table, will be on the table. We just got to figure out how to do it better. So we will definitely be visiting that. And the other thing is, I'm just remembering some other things I want to talk about earlier too, is inspections, raised by Robin. And I know his shop exclusively does remote inspections, excuse me. Also an opportunity, but also ripe for abuse, right? So we have to figure out how to utilize these tools and these opportunities, but have checks and balances to ensure they're happening effectively and be able to revisit them and say, if you're not doing it right, you can no longer do that, right? So these are things we have to do a better job of incorporating into our process. They're great when they're done right. Problem is when they go south, they become very destructive and problematic, and they're hard to get back on the rails, so to speak. So a lot of potential ways of doing business. But we have to keep in mind, at the end of the day, the state is accountable for certifying these units for public use. So we got to do it in a way that meets that mandate as well. Sorry, John, I'm gonna get to you in a second. I think Mike Schmidt has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Mo. Just a couple of catch-all comments here at the end. Really appreciate the time and effort that Dola's put in of getting this TAC put together. I know it's been a struggle to get it started, but obviously that's more of the hard part. Couple concepts here that I think need to be addressed overall, and this is why we're obviously interested in participating in this process for the TAC and getting the ASTM International subcommittee model at the table, because there's a lot of really innovative things happening with the stakeholder groups that we've been developing over the past 18 months. In Colorado, we've got not just municipal, city, and urban context to consider. We also have suburban and rural context, and this is going to get into the county area. So not everything is going to be based on the local jurisdiction at the municipal level. It's also going to have some impact at the county level. I think Eric's made a lot of really good points on this over the past year, and some of the letters and recommendations that he's made about how we need to be flexible in our thinking on this process. One thing in particular, and this is one that I've been pounding the ground on and speaking about for many years, and that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room for the development of affordable housing, and that's the provisioning of utilities. I don't know if some of you have been reading the trade press recently about the Amara development that's coming up here in Colorado Springs, but there's a lot of sparks flying right now about this 1,500 home development that's going to be extended east of Colorado Springs, but they have to obviously annex it into the Springs to take advantage of it. But guess what the big problem is? It's water. And they're trying to figure out light pole extensions for giving them the ability to bring utilities in. Utilities have been squabbling about whether or not they can provision the water. Here's what's a real key factor. The PUD process, the plan unit development that developers go through to create affordable or to create housing in general, not necessarily affordable, is a long, drawn out, very expensive process, that couples developers and municipal governments and county governments in some cases together at the hip. And obviously we're trying to figure out a way to come up with an affordable, sustainable housing solution for the tiny home industry. We've got to be able to start looking at ways of getting tiny home and tiny home communities built on private property and potentially not necessarily using a PUD process. We might need something in the interim that can obviously take advantage of the standards, voluntary consensus standards that can be developed for the building codes for health and safety, but be able to apply them at the local jurisdictional level with some state approvals to be able to create more than one tiny house on potentially a rural or suburban property environment where you can have maybe 5 to 10 tiny houses. And this is in this tiny home community area that we've obviously had some interest in. Yes, there's going to be impact in how those tiny units are developed. Maybe they get developed in a standardized fashion. They get certified and inspected in a standardized fashion. And when they go into communities, they get inspected at the time of installation. But we obviously have to look at flexible foundations. We have to look at utilities provisioning, because guess what? You're going to have to provide some utilities at that rural or suburban location that may not come from a classic utility. So it might have to be, different types of water management. It might have to be waste management systems that are not based on septic tank and leach fields. There are other technologies that need to be looked at. We know this is going to be a long-term, long drawn out process to try to develop new affordable housing in new locations within the state. And hopefully, I think if we can open up the broader scope of the discussion and address this area of utilities provisioning, because it's not always going to be right in your next door or right in the ground where you're proposing to build in an urban context. In these suburban and rural, it's BYOU, bring your own utilities. And in many cases, there's going to have to be some innovative solutions developed to do that. And lastly, I think this idea of the remote visual inspection or video inspection potential could obviously solve a lot of challenges for the staffing issues at the state level, but it will also provide a moving and an archival documentation of a home if it's done correctly from start to finish. I know Noah and Robin has been working on this for many years. There are other entities, NFPA has been doing some work in remote visual inspections that I think is worth looking at. We definitely should take a look at it early and not later, because I do think it's going to have some impact on how people purchase and buy and place their tiny houses and who they buy them from and whether or not they have the flexibility to do that. So again, appreciate the opportunity to contribute. Looking forward to the future meetings. And just one more last thing, Mo, are all these meetings every 2 weeks going to last 3 hours? Just curious.
Welcome to the
parting
party,
shot
Mike.
there.
Yeah, we've
Welcome to the TAC.
We've had 5-hour meetings before. Hopefully not, to answer your question.
Okay.
But it's
All
just,
right.
I'm here to serve you guys. By you guys, I mean the TAC and interested stakeholders in this process. And so whatever it takes to land the plane, if you will, at any given meeting, we will do so. But of course, we do have hard time constraints. As I mentioned, I would like to see this particular plane land at 11:30. We have padded on until noon if needed, right? So it really just depends. But as Nate mentioned earlier, we may be breaking this into more nimble pieces of the TAC and interested stakeholders to have more productive meetings. As a placeholder, we've got the big TAC meeting every other week, pretty much through the end of March. But we can change that and break it up as we see fit. It's a lot of opportunity. But anyway, Mike, a lot of good things you said. You did remind me of another important message that we probably should include it on this important factors to consider slide. And sorry, John And James, I'm gonna get to you guys next because I'm sure you guys want to weigh in on the utility discussion. So it'll be a great segue. But I do want to get into, and I'm pretty sure Eric and both Tim as building officials touched upon this, but I can't stress this enough. This bill has nothing to do with zoning, right? The state, Division of Housing, Department of Local Affairs has no jurisdiction over zoning. That is completely up to the local jurisdiction. We're a home rule state, right? So we have municipalities, and of course, we have unincorporated counties, as mentioned by Mike, right? So it's up to them what goes where and when, right? We're just strictly providing the mechanism for making them understand, number one, get educated on, and feel comfortable with a tiny home regulated by the state, right? It is still up to them on how to accept that, right? We will have a mechanism in place for ensuring that what is built to our definition is constructed, inspected, and certified as such. And that certification will be present for them to accept. Not just the local jurisdiction, but DORA as well, it's electrical and plumbing boards for the very utility issue that you raised, right? We'll ensure that it's installation, whatever standards you guys come up with and the board adopts, right? That those installations are inspected and certified appropriately after they've been installed by the appropriate party with education and experience to do so. So we can make all that happen. But at the end of the day, it's still up to the local jurisdiction on what is acceptable in their and where in their jurisdiction. So I hope that point is not lost on anybody. We're going to start with John, and then we'll go to James next.
Okay, thanks, Mo. From the state's, our inspection focus typically on manufactured homes, and that we look for the stickers approved. They've been, the plumbing and electrical has been inspected at the manufacturers supposedly, and you and Mo, you and I have talked considerably. When we find things that aren't, we send them to you that they're missing at the factory that they should be doing per the IRC. So we're in, at present with the tiny homes, we have no verification that the plumbing, albeit small, and the electrical in these units has been inspected, although I heard somebody say they use third parties, but those are not applicable to our codes at this present time. So it's really hard for our inspectors to approve a utility connection to it when we don't know that what we're allowing them to hook to as ever is installed the code. Does that make sense? So that's where, like I said, where this process I think will help with that. But at present, with them installing them already in the state of Colorado, we run into a lot of times where we can't approve the connection to the utility or to the gas pipe just because of the way it is. Gas piping we can look at and have them test it and verify that part, but the plumbing is covered in the walls, the water piping is covered in the walls, so it's really hard for our inspectors. We have been out to some factories around. Our guys will go out and do an inspection of the unit as it's being constructed and go ahead and give approvals. And that way they know that that unit that's going to be set there, or we'll do them on site if they're building an on site, as I heard mentioned, like a backyard or on a property, they're building one on site, we'll inspect just like a standard residential. But that was what I wanted to bring up was we do have difficulties right now with them being put in, installed in our jurisdiction, which has 39 counties of where we do residential, not knowing that whether or not that plumbing meets code or not that's in the units. Thanks.
Well, thank you, John. And just to clarify, a couple of things that John said, especially the site work part of it. And this is where it's going to get tricky as well, right? And maybe we need to have further discussions about it. But the way I see it, and I would love to hear from Eric Freed, who is part of this bill as well, is if someone is building a tiny home on their property and that home is going to stay there, that has nothing to do with this program, right? That should be under the local jurisdiction, right? Because that's basically a site-built home. It's just a tiny home, right? So they shouldn't be applying to go through our program, because the point of our program is in essence to do what a local building official, a building department is not set up to do, which is to ensure something built off site to be installed somewhere else, right? is built appropriately. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. Eric, I'm gonna get to you in a second unless you want to weigh in on that specific issue. But I do want to get to James. He has had his hand up for a while. So James, go ahead.
Thank you, Mo. I just want to go back to what we talked about earlier about the on-site visits. By performing a field visit as a committee, I think it shows shows our commitment to the industry and also consumer protection, that we're committed to do our due diligence to come up with something that's going to work. I think it's really important for us to do that because there's going to be, like you said, we can't please everyone, but at least we did everything we could in reason to show the industry that we're doing our best. So if we can show up as a committee all together, I think that's very impressive. Will be very impressive to the industry and also to consumers.
Sounds good, James. And it sounds like a site visit as a group is what we'll be working on. I'm excited about it. I haven't been to one of these manufacturers yet, so I've been waiting to start this process in order to do that. Eric beat me to it. He's already done it. Eric, you're up next, sir.
Yeah, just to further clarify, I think you covered it, but the comment about building a tiny home in the backyard was addressing some of the industry concerns that they're not big factories like, Clayton Homes or some other kind of thing. They might make 2 to 8 a year. They might just make one in their backyard. But if they're building one in the backyard to go to a different site, that is prefabricated construction and falls under these rules. But if they're building their tiny house in their backyard and it's staying in their backyard, it doesn't even go into this program. It will go to the local jurisdiction for inspections, except for, I think John said there's 39 counties where there is no local jurisdiction doing plumbing inspections. Then you guys get to look at it because that's how it works right now.
Well said, sir. And I think Mike, I see your hand up too. I'll get to you in a second. And I think he was trying to drive this point home, and Mike, feel free to clarify if I don't get this right, is the reality too that this product could be desirable and make sense to be placed in very rural areas that are not on the grid, so to speak, right? And so there needs to be an accounting for how do we regulate these structures. I think we already do this for modular, where they're going to have to generate power from propane tanks, solar, wind, battery systems to capture all that energy, leach fields, septic systems and leach fields for waste, and then of course well water for water needs. I have a house off the grid, actually. It's a site built house, but it's off the grid. So I'm very familiar with all these things. But yeah, we have to make sure we're also accounting for all those variations. Not everything's going to be in someone's backyard in Denver. We're going to have to account for all the settings as described to the state, but not just, being on or off the grid, as we mentioned, accounting for the unique geographic and climatic conditions of all the jurisdictions in our state as well. We are very fortunate to have a state that's very diverse in geography, but with that comes some incredible challenges when it comes to building pre-manufactured products to be utilized across the state. Mike, if you want to clarify anything,
Mo, great comments, and actually a perfect lead in to what I wanted to leave with the group, on the positive upside, because obviously there's a lot of work we got to do in the tiny home space here and looking at the tiny house on wheels and foundations and trying to grapple with communities and utilities. But here's some ray of sunshine that I can kind of leave at the end. As you may know or may not know, as people on the TAC or the people that are participating in this webinar, the Electric Grid Resiliency and Reliability Roadmap Bill, HB 22-1249, was passed in this past legislation. It's going to develop a microgrids roadmap for Colorado. And this is obviously in the area of resiliency and extending the grid in areas for critical infrastructure. But there were also some discussions about, how can we affect that in the areas for affordable housing? Well, there's a second bill called the Community Resilience Grant Program, HB 221013, that also passed. That's got a little bit of teeth in it. It's got a $3.5 million budget for experimenting in rural electric cooperatives and municipal utilities that may be, quote unquote, looking at extending microgrids. And one of the things that I spoke with, the original bill drafter for the original bill, Representative Tracy Bennett, she did the original bill for the resiliency model. Obviously, this area of being able to do experimentations and get on the stakeholders group and lay out a roadmap for the future. One of the things that I can see happening is that tiny home builders and, technology providers, people that are in fuel cells or doing things in solar and wind or geothermal can come together and maybe put together some pilot projects. And I've actually spoken with some county government and municipal government officials about this process. So I think we may be able to kind of align some of the microgrid initiatives and some of the funding to some of the testing and evaluation for these alternative solutions as we're applying some of the codes and voluntary consensus standards as we go. So, those of us that are here in Colorado, kind of know what's happening on the ground, and we can take advantage of that. So maybe that's a good pointer in the right direction to maybe grapple and deal with this utilities challenge. So,
that's great, Mike. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to assume that our sister agency, the Division of Local Government, will be very involved in the implementation of those two bills on the local level. Yeah,
and I think also the Colorado Energy Office is involved, and aren't they also tied in with this new energy code stuff?
Oh yeah, correct.
Yeah,
correct.
So there's a real good trifecta happening that I think we could all leverage from and work together. And I'm a big fan of collaborative communications, between those bodies, and happy to perform, any liaison work, with that the stakeholder groups on microgrids, because I'm going to spend a lot of time there and then maybe reflect that back to the TAC.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate
You bet.
that. All right. Well, let's, in the interest of time, to Mike's point earlier, let's transition. And I'll be real quick on this. I already shared some of this in an email, but this is basically recapping the plan process. This is subject to change depending on how we're doing as a group. Okay. But here's the plan. If you need me to spend more time on it, let me know. But I wanted to spend some time, and I think a lot of this has already been teased out through our discussion, which has been great. But if anybody wants to add to this discussion or wants to ask any questions that weren't asked, now's the time. I'll start with the folks from the tiny home industry. And Mike, you still have your hand up. Did you still want to speak, or were you done?
No, I'm good. Thanks. Sorry.
No, all good. Thank you. So is anybody from the tiny home industry, whether you're on the TAC or not, want to add to the discussion so far? Is there anything we're missing? Just any questions you have regarding process, statutes, rules, anything? And this is not your last opportunity, but I just want to make sure your voices were heard. Modular industry, excuse me. Oh, sorry, Tracy.
It's okay. I just wanted to say that I think as we dive into this a little bit more, the tiny house industry, obviously has some plans to, be collaborative with each other and just really make sure everybody's voices are heard. I think you guys have done a great job of that today. But to touch on the whole zoning thing, for the non-tiny house industry folks, from a tiny house industry perspective, for people that are buying tiny houses, people that are living in tiny houses, people that are selling them, people that are building them, when they're on wheels, right? And it's not part of, being tied to your local jurisdiction rules and inspections and tying into utilities and all of that way, through the way you guys do things now. The factor is that it is on wheels and it is movable. And so there are going to be a few things that I hope, everybody will kind of, come into terms with, but zoning is really one of our biggest obstacles. And I know this doesn't address it, Mo. I've acknowledged that from a long time ago when I read the bill. I respect that. But I will tell you all this, the zoning is going to come into play soon. And I do believe it's going to piggyback on the terminology and the definitions that this team puts together. We just recently participated on a zoning call here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, for new flex zoning and what is going to be defined as allowable tiny house communities. How much space that is, whether it's 4 acres and 18 tiny houses are allowed or whatever that may be, right? But I feel like this team and what's happening with the verbiage and everything is going to start to play into this zoning changes, which is really what's going to make an impact on the tiny house, on people, right, in general. So when we do say affordable living, it is affordable for people to live in tiny houses. It's a smaller footprint. It's just a little bit more affordable. That's all it is. They're still built to the same house standards. However, it's just a little bit more affordable and they move. So, I'll end this with that, you guys, just saying, just take that into consideration as we continue to move through this process.
No, that's great, Tracy. Thank you. And I think I touched upon this earlier, and I think you did as well, Tracy. This process, and I'm going to use some words that are not going to be exact plagiarism from Eric Fried, but this is going to shine some light, right? And with that comes recognition that this is a safe product that people can accept in their jurisdiction, right? So that should help with some of the zoning issues, I would hope. These are challenges that modular has had, manufactured HUD code homes have had for a long time, right? I like to think that they're getting better. I'll let the industry folks speak to that. But that's why education and outreach is going to have to be a huge piece of this. There's actually another bill from not this past legislative session, the prior year. I think it's House Bill 21-1271. It's basically a toolkit. So we're charged with working with local government, Division of Local Government, to come up with a toolkit to really help local governments really address their affordable housing needs, assess their affordable housing, right? And come up with tools and options on how to address that. And zoning is a big piece of that discussion. So we, the Division of Housing, are implementing that very bill. And there's going to be funding associated with that as well. So as we get cooking on this, and I say cooking on this, I mean implementing standards or making recommendations on standards in the form of proposed rules for tiny homes. If we're in a good place, I'm going to invite the person in charge of that bill to come speak to you guys, so you're all educated on our efforts there as well. Because I think that's going to help local governments really assess their needs and how to strategize on addressing them. And a tiny home could be an option for them to consider, especially one certified by the state of Colorado. But thank you for that, Tracy. Byron.
Hi there. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are, sir. We can hear you just fine.
Excellent. First of all, I really appreciate the comment you just made, Mo. It, very well explained. You're a good speaker. And I want to echo Tracy's concern, which you just addressed. It's going to come down to the local municipalities and counties to get on board with this whole bill, which I think some will love because you are going to shine some light on it and make it easier for them. And some are going to totally reject, unfortunately, because it's still unproven ground. The only comment I want to make about this, well, I guess a couple. First, I appreciate this meeting greatly. But second, I have fear and great concern that the builders of tiny homes here in Colorado are not adequately represented on the TAC, which has been something Thea has been pushing for quite a while. I feel you need more experienced tiny home builders that are local builders to be on the TAC, to be able to adequately address all these issues, because we're the people that have been in the field for years. We're the ones that know all the issues of building. We know the issues of the consumer's needs and concerns. And I'm hoping this all plays out well. I just wish there were more tiny home builders on TAC. And I'll be quiet after that. Thank you very much for letting me speak again.
Of course, Byron. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Just to stress again, I know everybody's heard this, but being on the TAC just means you get to formally vote on what is recommended ultimately to State Housing Board, right? Just because you're not on the TAC doesn't mean your voice will not be heard, right? As demonstrated by this meeting. I hope you understand that. This is a very open process, and we're going to engage with anybody that has something productive to share, right? To help us get to where we need to get to by July 1st, which is not much time from that. As far as adding more members to the TAC, I'll let the other TAC members speak on behalf of that or to that. I can tell you from someone administrating it, 12 members was a lot to begin with. Not every type of modular builder or manufactured home builder is represented on the TAC. You've heard introductions. I think we only have one person from factory built non-residential structures, which honestly is the vast majority of what we regulate in the state. We have one person, and he actually joined us late. So before I forget, let me have him, I think he's still on. Let me have him introduce himself. Is this, and I never asked you how you pronounce your name. Is it Sumit? I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
That is correct. It's Sumit. Sumit
Yes.
Santana. And I apologize for joining in late. I actually was on early on, and I had to drop off. I had an inspector come into our building, so but I'm back on again now. So it is Sumit. That is correct.
I appreciate it. And how do you pronounce your last name? Santankar?
Santankar.
Okay, Santankar. Okay, great. If you don't mind introducing yourself to everybody,
yeah,
that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So yeah, my name is Sumit Santankar. I am I'm the QA manager for Custom Instrumentation Services Corporation. What we do is we manufacture small shelters for basically equipment buildings for power plants and energy type of facilities. So basically what we do is our shelters, they're basically of 8x8 size, anywhere from 8x8 size to 10x20 size. And they monitor the environmental emissions from coming from power plants. So basically our shelters just house equipment buildings. They're unoccupied shelters. They're steel manufactured. And so yeah, we're basically just factory built, non-residential, commercial type structures. That's what our company does. So this is my first meeting here, and I'm curious to see how this goes, and definitely glad to be here. So
awesome, Sumit. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. I apologize again for being late, but definitely welcome to be here. So
great, thank you. So the point I'm just trying to make is, it's just, you may feel like you're not represented enough on the TAC, but what is that magic number? I don't know, right? How many is enough? How many is too much? From each aspect of prefab construction, right? Like I said, roughly we envision tiny homes to be a third of the residential side. We're not even getting to the non-residential side is much bigger, and we have one person on this 15-member technical advisory committee representing that. And like I said, that's the biggest fish, but it happens to be the quietest too. But with residential, where it's the loudest, right? About a third comes from manufactured hot coat homes, and about a third comes from modular. Currently, they're obviously half-half, but we envision tiny homes to be that other third, right? And that helps it all. But as I mentioned, from a administrative standpoint, when you start to get to 12, 15, 17, 19, 21, like they mentioned, the Energy Code Board, that is a lot of people to navigate, right? And I don't know how much more you gain by doing that when you're still listening to all stakeholders, right? Who have an important voice in this. So, but anyway, but that's something you guys want to pursue legislatively, by all means, go ahead and do that. So anyone else from tiny home industry that wanted to speak before I switch to the modular folks? All right, let's switch. Oh, Margarita. Sorry.
I was late on this. Yeah, no. So one more thing that the discussion turned to be really interesting was in getting all the environmental sustainable part of it included into the tiny homes. I think that will be a plus for us as manufacturers and sellers. I've been in conversation with GBES, which may be a good part of this stack. I'll be in touch with you more to see to talk about that for the energy conservancy side of this panel. So that could add a lot of input to our regulation and to our production side. and obviously for our consumers as well. I think that that will be a good, you know, and a really good outcome for them to have this opportunity in with tiny homes. And yeah, other than that, that's all I wanted to add. I'm going to comment on zoning on the chat.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Margarita. Appreciate it. If you could lower your hand, if you don't mind, that'd be helpful. Anyone else from tiny home industry? Apologies, my I guess after 3 hours, I'm starting to fall apart here. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right. Modular industry. Oh wait, there's some other people with their hands up. Tani. Oh, speaking of modular industry, Tani, you're up. Oh, sorry. Actually, before we get to Tani, I missed Art. Apologies. Art, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I just want to piggyback on what Byron was saying. Obviously, my concern first and foremost is Colorado, but as the organizer of the Colorado Tiny House Festival, I talk to manufacturers all over the country all the time, all year round. So you name the builder, I've probably talked to them and have a personal relationship with them to some degree. So obviously, one of the things that I'm focused on is also not restricting or having a good solution for people who are building outside of the state and are going to be delivering homes to Colorado. And even from this year's festival, we had numerous builders opt not to come to the festival from out of state because of concerns of how this would all play out. So everything, I try to be a man of few words. So everything so far sounds great, looks great. Everyone on camera looks great. And that's it.
Well said, Art, as always. Thank you, sir. Tani.
Thank you for letting me participate in this process again. I just want to share my thoughts and experiences over the last decade of working with DOLA and working through the rulemaking process. We've made a lot of changes, and I'm grateful for Mo and his staff and their willingness to be open and listen to industry. You know, I understand the concerns about not having enough tiny home representation on the TAC, but really, like, it's all spelled out in the statute who would be represented, and I'm constantly wondering why the association, the Rocky Mountain Home Association or whatever association, isn't on the TAC. But really, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, because Mo and his staff have been open to my input and the industry's input, even outside of the TAC members specific to our industry. And they have considered our comments, and they have actually adopted many, if not all of them. You know, the goal is to create rules that work for everyone, the industry, the state, and the consumer. And I really encourage all the tiny home folks to get input from their builders, from you know, their sellers, etc., about things that work, things that are a challenge, or, you know, and just work with the TAC through the process. As Mo said, you know, there will be opportunities to fix things, but the more we can get done on the front end, the better. It seems like we have a lot of time, but I've seen the department have to create other programs, and it really isn't a lot of time, in my opinion. So the more input you can get from everyone in the beginning, the better it's going to be. And again, I just, out of my past experiences, I'm so grateful for Mo and Sam and Donnie to help everyone through the process, because I, in my opinion, couldn't ask for better regulators to be running this program.
Thank you, Tani. Always too generous, as always, but thank you. No, Tani raises some excellent points, right? She represents a vast majority of who we regulate through the building codes and standards section. Of course, not tiny homes, but maybe eventually that'll be part of our organization. I don't know. But there's of course many organizations out there, and hers is just one of them. We view them all as partners, right? We want to hear from all of them. We want to engage with them, right? We want to learn from them. We're not always going to agree on things. And you can ask Tani, we don't agree on everything, but we listen to each other and we learn a lot from each other through that process of just listening and engaging each other. So a seat on the TAC is not the end all be all. I cannot emphasize this point enough. And it's great to hear somebody in the modular industry make that point, and I hope that resonates with you. If you want to share something and it's in line with what we're trying to accomplish as far as implementing the statute, we're not writing the statute here, right? But if it has something to do with what we're trying to implement, we're going to be listening to you. We're going to be listening to you very closely. And we try to find a way to account for what you're suggesting. Okay? So just keep that in mind. So once again, it's not the end all be all to be on the TAC. If you want to participate in proceedings, all you got to do is email us. We'll be reading those emails and communicating with you. All right. Thank you for that, Tani.
Mel, can I add one more thing?
Of course.
Thank you. My counterparts across the country are very interested in what's happening right now with Colorado, and it's unfortunate that some of the industry folks from the tiny home industry did not participate in the event that you mentioned. But the entire country is paying attention to what we're doing right now, and so we have a great opportunity to create a program that can be a model for other states. And so I just want to, again, just encourage folks, but also applaud you all for your commitment to creating a really great program that others can hopefully use.
Awesome. Thank you, Tani. Yeah, how cool would that be for Colorado to be known as a leader in tiny homes instead of legal marijuana for change? Wouldn't that be cool? Anyway, maybe that just humored me. But let's say cooking code, folks, we're past time. Anyone else that's not from tiny home or modular that would like to have their voice heard, now is your time. Susan, as a consumer, anything you'd like to add? Any questions that you have?
Two things. One, I did note in the chat that the biggest zoning restriction for tiny homes nationwide and actually globally is local requirements for minimum building size, home sizes, minimum square footage. So it doesn't matter how they're built or how they're certified, if they're not going to be allowed because of the size, it doesn't solve that problem. The other thing, and other people have commented on this, the discussion of having to have permanent foundations was a huge red flag, because it's just contrary to why people are buying these houses in the first place.
No,
and also I'm also in contact. So I'm not just in contact with people in Texas. I'm in contact with people all over the world. There are also lots of entrepreneurs who are now building, quote unquote, tiny house parks or tiny house communities. They're buying acreage in rural lands. They're putting, concrete pads or whatever, however they're doing it, and making big investments, especially if they're having to put in septic systems, utilities, and things like that. If they had to start putting in, serious permanent foundations, that would also make it unaffordable for the people who are trying to develop these places for people to park.
Yeah, Susan, I hope this wasn't misunderstood potentially. This is not going to require permanent foundations. A modular has to be on a permanent foundation. That's an IRC Appendix Q tiny house, right? It has to be on a permanent foundation. There's just confusion as to what that means, right?
Right.
What we're talking about for tiny homes could potentially be on a permanent foundation, but it could not, right? So we just got to make sure when we're talking about permanent, temporary, whatever, that we're all speaking the same language, right? But nobody's saying that they have to be on a permanent foundation. So I hope that's good.
Yeah, the one thing that I see is that there is a snowball effect, like an issue that we didn't raise, which is not really relevant to the builders, except it is relevant to their buyers, is that now we're starting to see counties that are charging annual property tax to people who are buying tiny homes and then putting them in RV parks and things like that. So there is a snowball effect where something happens somewhere and then it gets picked up elsewhere, and that's often a good thing, but it sometimes creates issues that people haven't thought about before. So it was really just the issue even being raised. So, okay, thank you for allowing me to participate.
Yeah, no problem. And just so you know, taxation was a big part of what we discussed for the bill. And I'm just thinking out loud here as you were talking, Susan, and others. I think once we get the proposed rules in a good place and noticed, we still have several months before the actual rulemaking hearing, or at least a month and a half. And what we can do during that time, before the rulemaking hearing, or in fact, we can utilize the time after the rulemaking hearing, before we go live on July 1st, is actually having an opportunity to have conversations, not about things that we have control over through Division of Housing, but will impact tiny home owners, manufacturers, and sellers, right? For them to understand how will taxation, what are the taxation implications for buying and selling these structures, for installing them on land, et cetera, right? And so another sister agency, our Division of Property Taxation, is actually housed within DOLA as well. And who's an important partner, we can invite them to speak on that topic. I mentioned the toolkit. We can have somebody speak on that topic. We could have John McGee and James McLean. James is formerly from DORA, but both of them could speak on, electrical plumbing connections, right? How would DORA view that, or local jurisdictions, since James is also the local jurisdiction now. We can bring a variety of speakers to this platform to help educate as well. So just something to think about. But first and foremost, we got to get this thing implemented, and then we can kind of help bring in these other important pieces to paint a bigger picture, if you will. That makes sense to everybody. All right, I think we've heard from everybody. I do need to land this by noon at the latest. So let's wrap this up. And this is getting to what Nate talked about earlier. And it's a thought, as you can see, at a very minimum, we've got a lot to cover, right? We're not even really, we just touched upon some other rulemaking stuff we probably need to address in the current modular program that may have implications for tiny homes as well. But there's a lot here to cover. Obviously, the three things that jump out at me are starting here, right? So construction standards for tiny homes, installation standards for tiny homes, and the foundation systems, right? And the second and third, excuse me, probably dovetail into each other, but it might make sense to start them out separately. So that's where I think we should start. If anybody has any other thoughts or ideas about where to start, I'm all ears. The question then is, how do we want to attack this? So are people interested in breaking up into groups to kind of start unpacking, if you will, and then repackaging each of these areas for Colorado, and then bringing it back to the TAC as a whole? Would you rather tackle these items from the outset and throughout as a whole? Anyone have any thoughts or comments about that? Can you guys hear me, or am I just frozen?
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
It might be better to do it as a whole, since we all come from different parts of the industry.
Fair point.
That may help out. Just a suggestion.
That's a fair point, James. Eric?
Mo, we have, I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but we have the IRC and the ASTM, and we have already all the codes that have set up the path to just, move forward with them.
I think it would be, oh, sorry, go ahead and respond to that if you want to.
Yeah, Eric, I think the problem, Margarita, why we're here is there's a lot of pathways. We got to find one for Colorado. Or maybe we're talking about multiple pathways, but how do we regulate that? So this is where the challenge lies, right? You mentioned ASTM, several people have. People have mentioned the IRC. Awesome, but if the answers were already there, we wouldn't be here, right? So there are options out there. How do we create them? How do we take them and create an answer for Colorado, if that makes sense? Eric?
I was going to say, and especially considering the time, that for now it'd be better to at least start with us talking about all these issues together and set the table. And then maybe at the next meeting or beyond, it becomes appropriate to set up subcommittees to get down in the weeds of certain things.
That makes sense. Do you guys want to start as a group with construction, installation? I'm guessing construction, foundations, and installation in that order. Well, do you any preferences on where to start? Anyone? Oh, Austin, you got your hand up.
I think construction, I mean, you're only as good as your foundation. I think you guys did a stellar job though on kind of identifying foundation. I think the construction of the home, I mean, this is really what separates people doing it at home in their backyard versus it being something that can actually be roadworthy going down the road. So all three of these topics are fantastic. This is right here. This is what's going to make or break the industry, in my opinion. This right here is the most important part because I mean, I've been around the block and I've seen some stuff out there that I really don't think should be representing tiny homes. So this is like life or death. Like, if how you build it, I mean, these things could be matchboxes. So this is a pretty important topic, especially if you're talking about Colorado, because we send houses across the country, but Colorado dealing with the different climates and weather. I mean, all these three topics are, I think you nailed it, man. I think you did a great job, but I just wanted to stress the part, because same thing in the modular world. I mean, you're building a home at the end of the day. And somebody mentioned how they talk about code. We follow this, we follow that. And well, in my years of experience, what I have noticed is it doesn't touch on construction. It doesn't touch on the type of building material that you can use. So to have that outlined, it's just the state's doing everybody a justice by making sure what is built, what does get built is structurally sound.
Wow, well said. So yeah, there's stuff out there. There's code out there, right? There's been nothing that's been packaged effectively, as far as I can tell, for this type of product that we're talking about as defined in our state statute, right? And that's what we're challenged with, right? So there's all this information out there that's very helpful. How do we package it for Colorado, for construction, for installation, right? And of course, the foundation systems in which these things will sit on, whether they be temporary, permanent, or not, right? We got to still figure all that out. So yeah, unless anybody disagrees, and I agree with Austin, we probably want to start with the construction side and gather what's out there and build a pathway through that. Mark, get your hand up, sir.
Sorry, Mo, got 6 people talking to me. Okay, just like Eric said, I think we take the whole thing first and then break it down as we go. The one question I have is if we do bring it underneath the IRC path, would our installers licenses cover this? If we bring it underneath the ASTM path, is it going to require a different installer? Is it going to be a GC? Who's going to do the installation at that point?
Well, that's going to be under the home installation section, right? So let's start with the construction standards.
Okay.
Right, and let's go from there.
That'll give us a path.
Whether it be ASTM, IRC, I don't know, some state that's already figured it out that I'm not aware of, right? Let's start with that And then, but we got to think about the implications, as you astutely pointed out, right? Right. If it starts here, how does it impact sale and installation? The reality of this is, regardless, the way the statute is set up, just to make clear, tiny home as defined in statute that we will then be certifying, anybody selling that type of product has to be a registered seller with us as well. And of course, there are implications for that. Anyone that's installing tiny home as defined by us has to be a registered installer, and there are implications for that as well. So we're going to unpack all of that. But let's start with this construction, because we got to get cooking on that, because that's everything kind of ties into that as a starting point, in my opinion. And sounds like a few, at least Austin agrees. But if anybody disagrees, I would love to hear that. I thought I saw Robin.
Yeah, I understand the standards for tiny home construction and standards for foundation system. Could you clarify the standards for tiny home installation? Is that more the utility hookup, or it seems like installation and foundation systems would kind of come together and be the same thing in some areas?
Yeah, they could potentially, and that's why I mentioned that earlier. But we're really talking about how that system needs to be tied down, right? So the way the statute reads, we're talking about, I'm doing this from memory, so apologies if I missed something. We're talking about the placement of the home, right? We're talking about any connections that have to be made to tether it to the earth, right? To secure it, leveling it, securing it. If there, and of course, this probably has nothing to do with tiny homes, but if there are multiple sections, this is more prevalent in modular in particular, but also in hardcore manufactured homes, making those connections, right? That is what the installer by statute is charged with, right? How does tiny homes fit into that is really what I'm trying to tease up here. But most of the issues we talked about are really going to fall under the foundation system part with regard to permanent, temporary, all that fun stuff. The installer is just going to be charged with placing it on whatever you say it has to be on, right? The connections, actually, the electrical and plumbing and all of that, that's actually outside of our jurisdiction. That's up to the local jurisdiction, just so you know. And if there is no local jurisdiction, it would be DORA's Electrical and Plumbing Board. So that's outside of our hands, right? So when we say installation, we're talking about placing it, securing it, fastening it, leveling it, and if necessary, attaching other parts to it. So I hope that answers.
Okay, thanks. And to me, you could probably combine installation and foundation system, but maybe you want to keep it separate. But
yeah,
just
we probably could combine them. I just teased it out because it's not just talking about foundation systems. It's actually talking about how to install what has been constructed to it, right? So really, it's three categories, right? Construction, the structure. The third one, what the structure is going on, and the middle piece, how does that structure get attached to that foundation? So I view them as three pieces, but they're all connected. No pun intended. But your point is a good one. It could probably fit into there as well. Anybody else? All right, I'm not hearing anything or seeing any other hands. Apologies if I'm missing you. It sounds like we have agreements, at least I haven't heard any disagreement, that we tackled this as a group and we kind of see where it takes us and whether we need to start breaking up into smaller groups. And we're going to start with the construction side of things. And I've seen a lot of chatter about different standards. And of course, I've also heard some. So if folks want to email me, and I know folks previously have emailed me quite a bit when the bill was being discussed during the legislative session and after that, but that's all buried in my inbox, right? So if you sent me something previously and you want me to present it to the TAC, please resend it to me. This is the official starting point, right? So if you want something considered, get it to me on and after this date for this forum, and I'll make sure to do so. So if there's a standard out there, if you see something out there in another state that you think would work perfectly, send it to me. If there's already national standards, which that'd be news to me, I want to hear about it. I know there's an effort to do that, If you think the IRC is a good place to start, but has some holes, then please identify that, but also identify how to fill those holes, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So we're open to everything. Mark? Or was your hand up from before?
You
I
mean
think
Mike?
Robin had his hand up first.
All right, who did?
Well, go ahead. Anyway, to answer Margarita's question, yes, Oregon does have this, and it's called the Middle Income TAC Committee. And yes, I sit on that one too. Basically, it does have its benefits, but it still answers to a higher committee. It does not have the authority to make some of the rules and stuff like with what we're doing here. Does it work? Works in Portland, works in Eugene, works in Salem. In the outlying areas, in Gresham, Troutdale, other areas like that, not so well. But this is it's an avenue, Margarita, that can be looked at for this. And Brian here, I talked to him quite a bit. I can get some information if we want to bring that in. I'm just a little worried about modeling after that because, like I said, it is set up differently than what we're talking about doing. It's not underneath the state program. It's usually done underneath the local jurisdiction.
Yeah, so I thank you for bringing that up, Mark. Just to be clear, several states have tried to address this, but a lot of them have found a way to do it at a local level. That's where we were before. That wasn't, Colorado's decided that's not good enough. So the Eric Frieds and folks like him said, we don't want to do it that way, right? So some local jurisdictions have come up with, El Paso County is a good one, right? It itself has come up, the county, to accommodate tiny homes, in particular park models. But if you talk to the building department there, they think this, that the way it's being done there is actually problematic. So they're actually happy to see this bill. So this is statewide. This bill is addressed as statewide, right? Is to alleviate the pressure that our local jurisdictions are feeling in trying to tackle this issue. It doesn't mean a local jurisdiction in another state hasn't figured out for their jurisdiction, right? Doesn't mean some jurisdictions in our state haven't figured out for their jurisdiction, right? But that's being removed off the table for them in Colorado. This is going to be a statewide program. So we have to figure out something that works for our state in its entirety, not just one jurisdiction. So thank you, Mark. Mike?
Yes, I had to get my microphone unmuted. Hey, just an administrative question. Is there going to be any type of collaborative Slack channel or, like a Trello board that might be used to, track documents and keep things moving along? Is there any thought in that area?
That has been suggested by somebody else. I'm not familiar with those things. I'm going to do it how I've always done it, unless somebody thinks there's a problem with it, and that's just me maintaining it and providing.
So you're saying that you're doing like an email, you get emails, you put some back out. Is there an email list that people are mailing to, or you're kind of?
No, you're going to email me, and then I'm going to disseminate it to everybody.
I see. Interesting. Okay, just a point of reference. Thanks.
Right. Because I'm trying to control. This could be subject to interpretation and debate, since this is not a decision-making body, right? But I like to rule on the air of caution, and that is to respect what we have in Colorado, which is referred to as open meetings law, right? So I don't know how strictly we have to comply with that, since you're not a decision-making body. By that I mean the TAC, right? But I want to respect it as much as possible, and to give the public as much opportunity to weigh in on what's being discussed by this body. So therefore, we try to ensure that conversations between TAC members about this topic or these topics as much as possible are limited to the notice meetings, right? And so when you have a lot of back and forth, you become potentially exposing yourself to not being complying with something that may or may not apply to a TAC member. So that's why it's best to communicate about these issues to me or Sam right? Who will then communicate it broadly to the TAC members and anyone else is interested to keep that clean. Does that make sense? Like I said, I don't think it's a big issue, but it's good practice to do. Okay. And I'm overtime because I think I was supposed to meet our attorney at noon, so I'm late for that. Anything else, folks? If I wrap this up? But thank you for a great discussion. This is a great kickoff meeting. I really appreciate it. I just give you a heads up that this group is probably going to grow, not the TAC. It's going to only grow by one person, but the actual stakeholders that are going to be interested in communicating about their ideas about this topic, because I'm going to start broadcasting our TAC meetings with Sam's help more broadly. So as a result, how we've been interacting may change. If we all of a sudden have 100 people who want to interact at a meeting, we may not be able to hear everybody. We may have to control that a bit more to get done in a timely, efficient manner. So I hope people understand. So if it stays small, I'll keep it open, right? To be speaking verbally. Doesn't stop you from chatting or sending something in via email between meetings, right? That will always be open to you. I'm just saying verbal communication during a meeting. If we see the audience grow, the participation grow, which is awesome, we may have to limit the conversations, except for between TAC members, just to keep the conversation going. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. We'll just play it by ear and see how it goes. Okay? Thank you guys so much. You've been fantastic. More to follow via email from me, but more importantly, I'd like to see more from you guys in the form of email to me so I can get that information out to everybody. Until then, or during all that, just keep in mind that we're scheduled to meet again on November 15th, same time. Hopefully the same link will work. If it's going to be a different link, I'll let you know. Much appreciated. Thanks again. Talk soon. Jimmy, go ahead and end the recording if you'd like.